Okay, it's now 7 p.m. Call to order and flag salute.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do we have the consent agenda commission minutes dated March 13th? Second, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Abstain? I wasn't here.
Okay. Do we have any topics from the floor? It would be limited to 5 minutes per topic that is not pertaining to anything tonight's agenda. Seeing none. Okay. Public hearing agenda. Okay, it's now 7:02, and the public hearing is now open. This is a quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of the hearing is a request for a subdivision and sensitive lands permit. Subject property is identified on the county assessor's map as lot 7,000 and 5801 on map 4N1W-6DA. The applicant is Kessie Engineering and Consulting. The owner is Rich Bailey Construction. Because it's a quasi-judicial proceeding, require the observance of certain procedural formalities, and we will take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an ex parte contact, conflict of interest, or bias in this matter? Hearing none. Does anyone from the audience object to the ability of a commissioner to make a fair decision? Seeing none. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows. Required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, a neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, and close of the record, deliberations and decision. The following statements are required to be made commencements of the hearing pursuant to the City Code ORS 197.7635. The following list is a list of applicable substantive criteria for this decision. All criteria under the St. Helens Municipal Code 17.136.060, St. Helens Municipal Code 17.40 pertaining to significant wetlands. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria and as described, or other criteria in the plan, such as comprehensive plan or land use regulations such as that found in the development code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of the approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to arise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue. Precludes appeal to LUBA and Land Use Appeals Board on the issue that precludes an action for damages in certain court. Let's see. Okay, do we have a report from city staff?
Nope.
Oh,
Just kidding. Thank you.
on this, really?
Yes, it's simple. Okay, so first, a little bit of housekeeping. When you arrived today, there was some papers in front of you, and just a couple things that weren't in your original packets. One is a preliminary drainage report provided by the applicant. Preliminary hydraulic analysis and drainage report. I did email that to you. And then the other one is a memorandum that I whipped up earlier today. You haven't seen it before. And this is from a conversation I had yesterday with the fire marshal. And it has some a couple of new recommended conditions given that conversation for the subdivision. And then the development agreement's a separate hearing, but there's also a new recommended condition for that as well. So keep in mind some of those extra pages are there. I do have an extra copy of the memorandum. I don't know if, Rich, you want to? Okay. So the first thing I want to do is give us some legal context. And that's why the first thing we have up there is the Brookfield subdivision. And if you had supervision, you would see that the date on there is 1997. So why are we going back in time? Well, I thought it was a good idea. We had a lot of comments when we reviewed the plan development overlay from people who resided in that subdivision. And I think it's good to look at that and where we are now with regards to the city's wetland rules. So late 90s, the city didn't have any specific wetland rules to my knowledge. And looking in the file of this subdivision, you know, there was a letter from DSL saying, we see that you're impacting wetland, by the way, we regulate that, work with us. And so what the end result was, and this is an as-built or an image of how things ended up after the subdivision was approved and constructed. And what I have highlighted there, or just, I guess to help everybody understand where we are geographically, north is to the right, so you want to turn like this to kind of, so just remember north is to the right. And the subject property, I kind of wrote it in red, the west edge of that property is there. And so when we look at the preliminary plat for the Bailey subdivision, that wetland extends easterly, and there's a depiction of that. And so at the time, because we didn't have any rules, what you ended up with are 4 of those lots, which are pretty sizable lots, but are largely encumbered by an actual wetland. And there was a lot of concerns about drainage. And if you went out there, you would see that those houses are right on the wetland's doorstep. And that may be why there's some drainage issues with them. But now things are a little different. In 2003, late 2003, the city adopted rules that said, okay, we have certain wetlands that we determine are significant, and this one is one of those. And for these significant wetlands, we're going to have local rules that protect them. But in addition, we're going to have rules that establish an upland protection zone, which can either be 50 or 75 feet. In this case, it's 50. And that protection zone is protected similar to as if it was a wetland. And so today, we wouldn't necessarily have houses built right up to the wetland edge. So just a little bit of context. We did have a hearing for the plan development overlay. The council heard that last week, and the council approved that. And the plan development overlay is very important because it is being used to make this possible. That lets us kind of sweep away many standards for flexibility. So where I think we should go to now is page 3 of the report. And there's a table there that kind of highlights the standards at play. Because normally in a subdivision, we would look at the zoning and go, okay, what are basic dimension, lot sizes, all these things. And what this table does is it shows us if we didn't have the plan development to utilize, what our standards would be. And then there's the column that says, well, does the plan development allow flexibility or not? And in most cases, it does up there. But there's a couple cases that it doesn't. That's just important to know, especially with my experience with other plan developments, because there seems to be, well, I've had to argue with people about what applied and what didn't. And lot coverage and minimum landscaping are things that technically, according to our code, you can't modify with the plan development. And then that which is proposed by the applicant is on the far right column. So they're proposing to reduce the minimum lot size a little bit. Some of the lot dimensions they're proposing to reduce. They're reducing the setbacks and such. They are keeping the building height as is. And there's a lot of flexibility, but this is kind of where what they're choosing to do because they want a certain outcome. So this is a very important table because these are the core standards which the subdivision is evaluated. So let's look at the subdivision to see kind of where we are at in as far as design is concerned. So this would be the first, well, not the first, but one of the attachments. It's the first 11 by 17 attachment. Yeah, there we go. And there's a lot of lines. Which can make it, if you haven't been studying this thing for months like I have, probably give you a headache. So as you can see, there's an extension of Westboro Way to the west, feeding off of that Brookfield subdivision. Very typical extension. It meets our 50-foot wide right-of-way. Because of where the property lines are at and the Westboro Way, the right-of-way is at, we end up with this weird little triangular piece. And so it's noted as open space. The plat does say public park, but I can tell you right now the city doesn't want it. So that would be something that we would want the homeowners association to take care of. And then the Westboro Way continues across the entire width of that. Note on your plans that there's a 100-foot wide Bonneville Power Administration easement there. So that's one of the encumbrances that this property has, in addition to the wetland. Which is kind of why it was really easy to recommend the plan development overlay. Another thing to recognize is only about half of the Westboro Way extension to the west of that cul-de-sac is actually on this property. And so when fully built, basically you're going to have in front of lots 18 and 17 a 20-foot paved street with the sidewalk. And there's the potential for that street to be widened or extended as adjacent development occurs. One of the challenges we had with this is when we have subdivisions, we're supposed to consider, well, where can the streets extend to? And we have to look at surrounding development patterns. And so in this case, we looked at our transportation systems plan, and there's a potential extension of Summit View Drive, which is just a little bit west of this property. And so we thought that was a logical place that it could potentially extend. And having this tucked in the northwest corner allows the possibility of the street to extend northwesterly or westerly, just depending on what happens with the adjacent properties. The cul-de-sac itself necks down to a 40-foot wide right-of-way, which is consistent with city standards. The cul-de-sac bulb exceeds city standards, and the reason they did that is to meet fire code, which has greater standards than ours. So you see a lot of lots, and you don't see a whole lot of public right-of-way. What's being proposed is a private street off of Sykes that would serve 5 lots, 1 through 5. And then there is also a private street off of the end of the cul-de-sac that would serve lots 6, 7, 8, and 9. Our code does allow that in circumstances where it's impractical to have a public street. And so that's something we worked on with the applicant quite a bit. Of course, you have the wetland there tucked away in the southeast side of the site. And as I mentioned before, it has a 50-foot upland protection zone. And there are a couple other things at play which I've already talked about. There is the plan development and the development agreement. And both of those things are necessary to achieve what the applicant is proposing. Because what they want to do is to utilize half of that protection zone as part of the lots, and so that would be an easement, and then the wetland and 25 feet of the protection zone will be a tract. Just like the little tract north of Westboro Way, it would be a tract dedicated for the wetland. And that's the difference between what the rules we have now versus that Brookfield subdivision, because you didn't have the rules that said that the wetland needed to be in a dedicated tract. There are a variety of conditions. A homeowners association is mandatory given the plan development outcome. And we can go over the conditions if you would like. There's a lot of details. I may be forgetting stuff as I talk here. I should note there is a proposed trail that goes through the protection zone for the benefits of the people residing in there. We don't have much of a problem with that.
Hey, Jacob.
Sure.
Page 5 of 17. It's probably obvious, but you said discussion 3 phases are proposed. You meant 2. Is that right?
There are only 2 phases proposed.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a leftover from Emerald Meadows that I didn't catch that typo.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 phases are proposed, and that's a good thing to mention. Phasing is okay as long as the commission approves it, and that's why I have it highlighted. The commission hasn't been had problems with phasing of subdivisions in the past. It's a benefit to the developer because it basically buys them more time. They can build one phase out, sell the lots, make some income, and then work on the second phase. And then time is also a good thing, especially if there's a recession looming. We know that crushed a lot of subdivision approvals in the past, and so time can be helpful because this isn't the funnest thing for developers to go through.
So can you describe the phasing on that map?
Absolutely.
Just to be clear, I think I know where it is, but
Yeah, it's a little hard to see, but the phasing
here, I guess. Yeah.
is basically the phase line. You can see a dashed line between lots 4 and 6, and also between 5 and 6. And so essentially your phases are broken up into those lots proposed to be accessed from Sykes versus those from Westboro and the cul-de-sac.
Okay.
There is an existing house on the property. Fortunately, it was in a convenient place, so it it wasn't an obstruction to kind of putting the puzzle together like can be the case sometimes if the house was right in the middle of the property. You know, they either have to sacrifice the house or really mess with those property lines. Now, as far as my conversation with the fire marshal, well, maybe I'll go over the conditions and then talk about the newly proposed conditions when we get to that point. Because I think that will just define the things that we're talking about and we'll reveal all the details. So the first condition just talks about how long it's valid, time extensions, the phasing. Bottom line is if they get it approved and they do nothing, the approval dies. If they do stuff, it can keep it alive. They can file for time extensions to keep it alive longer. Condition 2 talks about the stuff we want to see before we get a final plat application. So basically, the order of things are 1, preliminary plat approval. That's why we're here tonight. And this is your decision. This is not a recommendation to the council. The development agreement is a council decision. So when we get to that, that's going to be a recommendation. But this is you. You're the decision-making body on this subdivision. In any case, preliminary plat approval, construct the improvements of the subdivision, streets, all those things, and then final plat. The final plat is the document once recorded. You would now officially have all those lots and then can be sold. And of course, we want certain things to happen before we have the final plat because one of our jobs is to prevent chaos. So under condition 2 talks about those things. 1, we want construction plans. So this talks about our streets, some of the frontage improvements. And when I say that, I mean sidewalks, sidewalk, curb, gutter. And we want them in certain places, but we don't need them everywhere. There are places we don't need the sidewalk, at least for the purposes of the final plat, because those will be completed as each lot is built upon. And that's typical. So, for example, we may want some of the intersections of the cul-de-sac and Westboro done because we know a driveway approach won't be there. But for the other sections of the lots, the home builder will complete those frontage improvements because you don't want the sidewalks to get all broken up from construction. Note, one of the condition talks about the private roads subject to fire marshal review. There's a lot of standards in the fire code, and I don't think it's going to change the layout substantially, but there could be some tweaks to that, as well as various no parking, street lights, fire hydrants, and of course we want to know the locations of the utilities servicing the existing house, so we know how that's going to be connected to the new extensions. This gets me to the memo I gave you.
I want to, before you go there, I want to just stop you briefly. Because these are private roads, who's going to enforce the no parking restriction?
I actually had a question from a citizen on that same question earlier today.
Smart citizen.
It's going to be, the city police are not going to enforce that on private roads.
That's right.
So it's going to be up to the homeowners association for their own safety and welfare, or I believe the fire marshal can enforce that as well.
Which brings me to another question. I was going to say this for later, but since you were so kind to bring it up. Regarding the homeowners association, anything in the covenants that require that they be funded in perpetuity so that they can do the things that they're being required to perform, such as maintaining the wetlands and so forth?
I would guess that's a statutorily requirement.
Well-
I don't have exhaustive experience with CCNRs, especially in the last several years.
I mean, we put the burden of requirements on these homeowners associations, but if they don't have any power or any money to perform the duties that they're required to perform, it's going to go by the wayside anyway.
Well, with a typical
Wouldn't they be
CCNR,
in
you'd
the
have
base?
each owner having a right to say something, I would think.
Well, that's what I'm saying though, but does that also open it up so that they can be taxed? The property owners can be taxed.
I believe so.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify.
At the right
because
time.
I'm not sure of that.
Okay, well, let's see what the
The
applicant.
HOA, don't they pay dues?
Sometimes.
Don't you pay dues into your HOA normally?
Yeah, there's something they've gotta pay because there's other, open
Yeah,
area.
to keep it going and
Right.
improvements.
Okay.
And they have to determine how much
Okay.
they're gonna need.
But so that's a statutory thing. It's in the law.
As you purchase a lot, as part of the lot is CCNR, so it can dictate about anything it wants to if you buy into a lot.
Well, for an example, I live in a development that was originally homeowners. That was back in the 80s. Hasn't existed for years. So, there's no tax on the property owners or anything like that. And I want to, I didn't know what the law is. I wanted to make sure that, if we invest requirements into this organization, that they have the power and the money to continue to maintain and do what they're supposed to do. Because without those two things, we're just saying an organization has to be formed, doesn't say that, how they're going to perform their duties.
Why don't we see what they've got?
Well, I know they have the power based on what I read, and I'm assuming, homeowners associations are pretty common,
They are.
and I've seen them not work very well. But, when we go into these, I know the city doesn't want to own it, and plan development mandates it, and that's where we're at.
So,
But with the HOAs, how do you dictate to make sure that they cover the upkeep of the certain areas that they need to? As far as us planning, do we
Well,
put
that's
a restriction on?
That's why we have the development agreement. The development agreement is going to include a protection area management plan that says this is how it's supposed to be maintained, and it provides avenues for the city to be able to enforce that.
So your HOA or your homeowners have to get together and determine how they're going to come up with, say, the money or whatever to take care of the roads and the whatever all they have to take care of. We just mandate that they have to do it, right?
Yeah, and we make sure that the bylaws and all those things are in place before prime time, before we get to the final plat.
Are we going to expect to
Okay.
have a contact person for the city? Sorry. Are we going to expect that the homeowners association will have known contact points for the city if there's problems with maintenance or groundwater or roads or anything?
Typical of any legal document, there is an identified person. Now, that changes over time, and given my limited experience with them, how that change in name works, I couldn't tell you.
It's called president.
do we have a structural plan so that the city will be informed how that works with this particular development? And will be able to contact the person 10, 15 years from now?
That's why we have legal counsel. So we're going to have these documents in place. They're going to be recorded on the deed of each property. So that's the legal binding document.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, okay.
So you're saying that in here, the private roads will be maintained by somebody other than the city?
That's correct. And the private roads, even without the planned development, it requires a maintenance agreement. And so it could be that it's not the homeowners association, that it's just the benefactors of that specific easement. For example, lots 1 through 5 could be responsible to maintain Bailey Court.
Are the, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And that's very typical. We have a maintenance agreement. That way the neighbors don't fight over, how much they're supposed to pay. And that's pretty common. We've done a lot of those.
The private roads, are they required to be paved or can they be gravel?
They'd be required to be paved, yeah.
And they have to meet city standards?
They have to meet the standards. What our code says is they meet the standards per the specifications of the city engineer. We'd want it to be paved. We'd want it to make sure it can have a fire apparatus on it.
Are they required to have curves and?
No, not necessarily. No.
Yeah. But they are required to be paved.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So just one other curious question. So they have names. Are those lots' addresses, even though they're a private street? Will their address be Bailey Court? Or will it be Sykes Road?
Well, we have never had private streets, at least in my experience, that have names to them. If they want to name them, I don't see that we have a problem as long as Columbia 911 can approve the name. That the emergency response may favor that. I don't know if we really care either way.
I just didn't know what it meant as a private road if it was an official road for an address. I don't understand that. But.
Even if it's a private road, the fire department needs to know where it's at.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's a different question. But it's not getting your mail.
But you still,
P.O. box.
But anyway, I was just curious.
Do we need a turnaround then on those first 5 lots, seeing it's like it dead ends there for the 5 lots?
Well, and this is something that we kind of went over with the applicant to some length.
Do they need sprinkler systems, then, like we've previously done?
So what our code says and the fire code says is when you have an access way that's longer than 150 feet, a turnaround is required.
Right.
And in some of the earlier renditions of this, well, it looked a little different. And we talked about this at length. And what the applicant did was, okay, well, if we can connect Greenway Court with Bailey Court, then why do we need a turnaround? This is something that the fire marshal, he didn't seem to like it. He seemed to think that a turnaround would still be required. But he said that if it wasn't possible, you can always sprinkle it. And that brings us to,
Now, where is Greenway? Is that a stub now?
that's the private street off of the cul-de-sac.
Cul-de-sac.
it's right here.
Okay, Jacob,
Okay.
Our flag-
I'm talking
our-
about lots 5, 6, and
are lot 1 and lot 5 flag lots,
No,
considered flags?
no, flag lots are prohibited in the R7 zone.
the road comes
So how
out
do you
of
get a
sight.
fire truck up there?
So lots 1 and 5,
Bailey.
if all you saw were property lines, you would go, hey, those lots are landlocked. What the heck? But Bailey Court that is an access easement. And that is an access easement centered on the property lines of 1, 5, 2, 4, and 3. And this is pretty common when, partitions and stuff where you have an easement like this. And so that's a reciprocal easement for the benefit of all those property owners. And that is what it's going to constitute the private road from a legal standpoint. So you'll have the easement and a maintenance agreement, and that's their access.
But how does a fire truck turn around up there?
Well, the applicant's proposal was to have a connection at least 20 feet in width, where if it was, let's say it was putting out a fire in lot 5, that it could traverse past 5 along the north sides of 4 and 6, which on the plan shows a proposed 20-foot wide access way,
Okay.
and then connect to Greenway Court. The plans note a bollards or cable between lots 4 and 6. The fire marshal didn't like that because bollards take too long to remove, and as the fire marshal noted, a cable can result in decapitation for unsuspected people on motorcycles and stuff like that. So if they did have some type of openable obstruction, it would have to be a gate.
Well, would that connector have to be paved then? Or would they leave that gravel? Or
Fire code allows gravel, but our code says paved. Yeah, our code says, except for like industrial applications, any area traversed on by vehicles is supposed to be paved with asphalt, concrete, or similar material. So we'd require it to be paved.
Now we're reducing the size of lots 4, 5, and 6. 7,
no, 4 and 6 anyway.
well, not if we put in the Greenway Court.
A little bit of 5, a little bit of
Connection.
5, a little bit of 5 there.
If it's gotta be 20 feet
Same here.
wide, it's,
But there's the potential of it having to be wider.
It's this thing right here,
well, I
Or
just
here.
went minimally.
a little bit of 5
Here.
Yeah. So as the fire marshal noted,
goes,
If
6 up here.
the houses on lots 4 and 6 are greater than 30 feet in height, they need a 26-foot wide roadway, or they could be sprinkled. So that part is going to evolve a little bit beyond this preliminary plat, and it becomes a matter of your comfort level. When I get the final plat, that's an administrative application, meaning it's my decision.
Right.
And one of the things I have to look at, one of the standards that I have to apply, does this substantially comply with what was approved? And if lines get tweaked a little bit, that's okay. If it's way different, then I have to go, well, does this still meet the intent of the preliminary plat, or do we need to start over? My guess at this point is, okay, we're going to have some tweaks in here, but I don't think it's going to substantially change the layout. But
the size of some of these lots are minimal.
Yeah.
well, it's a plan development overlay,
Yeah, that's right.
and technically, so they're choosing to have a 6,000 square foot minimum lot size. They could say there's no minimum lot size. The plan development allows that. But the plan development does say that your density still has to be the same, but it lets you manipulate the lot sizes and shapes to come out with something reasonable. And then for you, it's not thou shall be 7,000 or 6,000 square feet. They chose 6,000.
That's what my question is, because it was 6,000 on the table.
But none of them are under 6,000.
No,
Yeah.
no.
So they're meeting the standards that they chose.
Okay,
But-
that answers my question.
But those lot sizes are encumbered by these easements and buffers, and so they're not 6,000 they're not really 6,000 feet of buildable space.
Yeah, in some cases, the footprint is smaller than your typical lot.
Did you finish your presentation?
I
I
was still on condition 2.
didn't think you had.
He wanted to talk about the fire marshal, then I started asking questions.
Um,
Did you want to go over the fire
Sorry.
marshal's memo?
Trying to jump in there. But
I actually think I ended up covering it a lot with your questions.
Okay.
Um,
Well, what about the hydrants, though?
so hydrants, as part of the utility plans, hydrants are going to have to be identified, and that's already embodied in the conditions.
Okay.
We'll need utility plans, hydrant locations subject to the city and fire marshal review. One of the new conditions under condition 2, because one of the comments about the cul-de-sac was from the fire marshal, and he observed that the space in between the sidewalks shown was not the 96 feet that they want to see. But if the sidewalks were used for that, then you would have the 96 diameter that they want. So I talked to our city engineer. Usually we don't like rolled curbs because you don't have a lot of access control. But it's a cul-de-sac, so we're not so worried about that. If they want to use rolled curb to meet that, we're fine. We just need to make sure that the sidewalks in those cases are built to a beefier standard to withstand vehicular pressures. Thus, recommended condition 2A11, which talks about the cul-de-sac and the sidewalks, as I had just mentioned. Also, we'll need some no parking on there because for it to be free for fire response, you can't have cars parked there.
So 2A11,
There is no 11.
yeah,
we're adding it.
That's on the memo.
Oh, okay.
And
Oh.
Got it.
so
Yeah.
that's going to be for the,
that's the additional.
Yeah, so I wrote them out on the memo to hopefully make it easier.
Yeah,
okay,
I see what you're saying.
The backside.
okay.
So condition 2B, and I know this was a concern from many people as part of the overlay, and that talks about our drainage plan. Our rules say that you can't increase downstream flow. And the applicant did give us some preliminary analysis. I talked with our city engineer about that today, and she said that on the surface, yes, what they're proposing would comply with our rules. As is typical, after preliminary plat approval, we'll review that in more detail and make sure that everything's up to snuff. But conceptually, it appears that the stormwater requirements of the city can be met.
And it looks like the outfalls are in the buffer,
Yes,
not directly into the wetland.
yes.
Okay.
And then note that we also have a line in there about protecting wetland water quality.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
And also impacts.
Um,
Oftentimes those outfalls impact wetlands and they don't even think about that as being wetland impacts. That's good.
So 2C, the plan development overlay has to be adopted. It's pretty much on its way. I bet for all I know, someone will appeal it or something. Development agreements necessary, that's condition 2D. Condition E talks about guarantees for certain things. That's where we want most of the stuff built, but there's a couple things we can be okay, and that's kind of talked about in there, like the sidewalks, as I mentioned. Conditions 2F and G talk about the protection area management plan that I had mentioned. and then a restoration plan. And because it's virgin protection zone, I don't know if a restoration plan will be necessary per se, but they'll have a wetlands person to tell us that.
They will need that for their pipelines for their outfalls and other impacts they'd have in there. Those are the only impacts, and the building of the trail.
Yeah.
So I had a question about that. Oh, you knew I would, right? So you have this 50-foot buffer from the wetlands, but they're having half of that in the back of the lots.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that a buffer in the back of the lots? How's it going to be anything?
Well, what it does is it helps the developer with the numbers.
I get that, but how is that a buffer? Because in my experience, you put a wetland in the back of a lot or a buffer in the back of the lot, individual landowner, he's going to do whatever he wants to with it after it's built. And it'll be nothing but whatever they want, be a lawn or whatever.
Yes. And I've seen many examples where there's a fence built and the thing on the other side is a wall of briars.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
Okay.
One of my recommended conditions of the development agreement is that the applicant install a fence along the 50-foot upland protection zone. So at the 50-foot mark,
Oh,
the fence, be subject to all of our basic standards, and that it be uniform and include a gate for each lot. That way everybody has access to the other side. The legal documents are going to establish legal responsibility for maintenance. But that's only one thing. If you and most people are going to want to build a fence. And so this makes sure that the fence is uniform, it's built in the right place because it's done all at one time, and it has the gate there to facilitate that sense of maintenance and ownership. And so that's kind of one of my approaches to address your concern.
Can I ask quickly if you put any restrictions on what materials that fence might be made of? It occurs to me that a wood fence would not necessarily be in existence 10, 15, or 20 years into the future.
Yeah, we could. I didn't get into that in my recommended condition, but it's certainly something we can discuss when we're at the development agreement hearing. If you want to expand on that condition to,
I think the fence is such a wonderful idea. It needs to be a fence that is likely to have lasting value, not something that's going to rot into the ground real quick.
so maybe solid gold.
Yeah, it's a fence.
Sterling silver.
I'd even accept aluminum.
but you want something pleasant,
Yeah.
fit into the landscape.
Now your idea was to put a gate behind for every property along there?
Yeah.
So the fence.
The only question I have in regards to that is, doesn't that seem then as if the owner of that residence also has that additional property that they can go on?
They do.
Or-
They do.
The wetland is
No,
their
the-
open space for their enjoyment.
The buffer is.
But I thought the wetland was also for the enjoyment of everyone within that.
The trail is.
Half of it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
half of the buffer. Half of the buffer belongs to the adjoining property owner. The other half of the wetland belongs to everybody.
Not the wetland, but the buffer,
Just the buffer zone.
right? It's all buffer, not wetland.
Well, the tract is going to have the wetland and
right.
25 foot of upland protection zone.
Right.
The other 25 feet belongs to the individual lot.
Yeah.
Okay, then how are you going to separate the 25 feet of the buffer that belongs to the property owner
You mentioned private
Against-
property.
against the 25 foot buffer that is plus the wetlands that belongs to everybody in the subdivision.
How are you going to divide it?
Well, yeah, because if you have gates that open up into the 25 feet, one half of the buffer, what's to stop the property owner from having the additional or taking over the additional 25 feet? What designates 25 feet of the buffer belonging to everyone in the subdivision versus 25 feet of the buffer that only belongs to the adjacent property owners?
Well, if the developer wanted to be creative and have little markers out there that have minimal impact to the upland protection zone, they could do that. The fence will be on that line, so you could easily measure 25 feet out. But I don't know.
Well, I'm just raising this because I know it's going to be an issue down the road at some point. There's going to be a fight over, this property is open to everybody and that property is mine and all that. There has to, if we're going to do it right and we're going to identify a certain section of the buffer for the enjoyment of everybody in the subdivision, then there should be some visual dividing line so that everyone knows what the property division is.
Sure, yeah.
Or you just have all the 25 feet in the back of the lots be open to everybody.
Well, and I think that's more, I think that's better.
Let's not deliberate.
I think that's going to be all explained or talked about during the development agreement part, because if the wetlands is tract A, that's going to be referenced, I believe, in the development agreement, and that'll be if whoever purchases a home is going to be subjected to the CCNRs, and I believe that would be part of the development agreement, and it would specify in there that this part is like community, and this part is yours, right?
As far as your 50 feet, if you put the fence within the 25, at the 25 mark, then in the deed, you could just have the 25 feet within your property is not able to be developed by sheds and whatever.
That's what I was saying.
It has to be kept in natural.
Does get developed when you just have that.
Yeah, I think we're jumping the gun on this. This is more of the development agreement
All right.
discussion,
Okay.
but
But it has to be discussed.
sure, yeah. So condition 3 talks about the stuff we want on the final plat. We do have a maintenance agreements for the sharing lots on that. There's conveyance of the open space to the association. I won't go over much of that. Condition 5 talks about the declaration to establish the planned community. That's something that needs to be recorded with the final plat.
There you go.
Let's see. There's a special condition about landscape trees. So given our tree laws, there was a loss of some trees, though I should note none that were in the area of protection. And what the applicant on their plans, they called them landscape trees, but they show them in various places. So that's a special condition, kind of similar to what we saw with Emerald Meadows, but slightly different. Because of the BPA easement, we want the trees to be small there. And there's a lot of details on this, but I don't know, I think that's probably a good start. I'm sure more will come up as we discuss.
Is that it, Jacob?
Yep.
Great. All right, this time we could hear from the applicant.
My name is James. Hear me? My name is James Kessie. I am the project manager and the engineering consultant representing the owner and developer, Rich Bailey, who's also up here. I'm also a licensed civil engineer in Washington, Oregon, and have worked with the staff and the owner to this point to come up with the development and the presentation you see before you today. I wanted to, I took some notes as we were going through here, and you had a lot of good questions. And I think maybe if I spend a couple minutes and go through and try to address your questions, it might make a little bit more sense, and see how we can get something that's you know, a good product and yet be acceptable. Okay. So one of the first things I wanted to bring up. So the concept of the overall development was to try to create lots that were fairly consistent with the other lots in the nearby area. We do have R17 or R7 zoning, minimum 7,000 square foot zoning, and the smallest lot that we do have is 6,000 square feet. But our actual average lot size is actually 7,000 square feet, so that we were trying to be as compatible as we could. This lot in the property is very difficult to develop because of the wetland and a little bit of the slope there. So, and it's got some unusual dimensions on the property. So it was a little bit challenging to deal with that, and also the BPA easement. But some of the major concepts that we wanted to make sure that we did for the project were to provide a extension. Wait, let's see here. Which one is the red button? Yeah, I was trying to point. Oh, okay. Okay. I just wanted to. Oh, you can give me the mouse with this. Oh, okay. Oh, this one right here? Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. So I just wanted to point out that, as Jacob had mentioned, that this street is set up so that, you know, this is the stub that provides access to everything on the, I'll call it the northern portion, but for West Borer Way that can be extended, and then this cul-de-sac comes off, and that's called Forest Trail Circle as a cul-de-sac, and then we have a 20-foot wide half width or 3/4 width improvement here, so that we have a stub out here, so that this can be extended in the future. And then if this property comes in for development in the future, that they would also be able to widen out and complete the road to the full city street standard. One of the other things that Jacob had mentioned is that this triangle piece here, track B, is that we would actually prefer to not call it open space, because there has been some discussion with this property owner, and they in fact may want to end up either acquiring that piece, or it would allow them access and potentially allow them to develop their property in a manner that's good. So we probably won't, this is certainly not going to be public, and we'd probably just prefer the option to have it as a tract, so that the Rich Bailey owner has some options on what to do with that in the future. So I did want to point that out as well. As we move down, we did provide a trail to have access, so that pedestrian access could come down this route, and then we're kind of right along the edge of the buffer, and we try to weave it in through the trees. It would be more of a gravel surface trail to try to be less impactful to the buffer, and then that would connect down to Bailey Court, and then run along the side of Bailey Court, and then connect into the sidewalk on Sykes Road. So there would be a pedestrian access open to the public that runs all the way from Sykes all the way along up to the cul-de-sac. So we had some pedestrian connectivity. As was discussed, these two, there is a private street here, Greenway, and there was a couple questions about the width. This is actually designed to be 26 feet of paved width up to this point here, and both Greenway and Bailey Court are actually were intended to be just slightly less than 150 feet so that we wouldn't have to have the turnaround, but we would connect those with a minimum 20-foot wide paved shared, emergency fire access between the two, so that if there was an emergency and the fire or emergency access vehicle had to get through, they could connect between the two. And we will work that out in the final design. This issue had come up on Emerald, and I don't know if you remember on Emerald Meadows, but we ended up having a similar connection from the subdivision internal street up to Pittsburgh Road, and that was a similar where they have a cable or a bollard preventing day-to-day public access. However, if there was an emergency access, they could make that connection. And then depending on how the final building, what was also determined at Emerald Meadows is that the determination for fire sprinklers and any other fire measures would be determined at the time of the building permit application for the houses. So the city will get at least several opportunities to make sure that the fire standards are met and the connection standards are met. And in talking with Rich, he's willing, depending on how that works out, to work closely with the fire marshal and the chief building inspector or official to make sure that we satisfy everybody on that aspect. Let's see. I did want to also ask, before I forget here, there's one condition of approval that I wanted to just go ahead and make one minor adjustment to, and that's condition on page 15, condition 3A. It talks about the conveyance of the common open space to the planned developments and homeowner association, and including the wetland protection buffer tract and tract north of the proposed extension of Westboro Way. And I just wanted to insert into and tract north or to owner of the proposed extension of Westboro Way, so that small triangle piece labeled tract B there would have the flexibility to not necessarily be an open space, but would be at the discretion of the owner to, if he wanted to sell it or if it were to be acquired by the neighboring owner. So it's not a buildable tract, but it certainly has some usability. If it doesn't end up being used, then it would be part of the final plat, and there would be included as one of the tracts. But at this point, we don't know exactly what that's going to be. So just wanted to give the owner some flexibility on that. Let's see. I also did want to point out that going back to the table that Jacob had mentioned, the Plan Development Standards table on page 3 of the staff report, that you are in fact correct. The minimum lot size, we intentionally try to keep it at 6,000 square feet. One of the challenges of the site was because of the wetland, but it's, even though it's a challenge, we also wanted to make it a feature, and part of the nice, I guess, the feature is that if you back up to a wetland or a green space, it gives you a nice peaceful situation. And there are, not everybody wants to have a big backyard, and not everybody wants to have to mow things and maintain. So the lots that do back up to the wetland, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the lots out of the 18 back up to the wetland. So on those lots, they're not going to have a big green lawn in there, but the intent was to try to, and I've actually done this on several projects where to try to create more of a habitat or a wetland buffer area that would be planted with native plants, wetland plants. We try to encourage the homeowners to become responsible, and also to improve the habitat behind there. A lot of people like to watch birds, and so by planting native species and planting friendly, wetland buffer friendly type plants and vegetation, then that's going to encourage plants and animals to grow there. And it's nice to look at. It's lower maintenance, and so that's one of the I guess, a feature that we're trying to promote with the project. The goal is not to have a bunch of sheds in those buffer areas. There's lots of questions that were raised about how that buffer area would be maintained and provided for. The CCNRs and the HOA will be clear and lay out that the buffer areas would need to comply with the protection area management plan, which will be ultimately provided for by the wetland biologist. So everything that will be in there, they'll lay out what kind of plants can be planted. They'll lay out what kind of activities will be allowed. You're not going to be able to put sheds in there. You're not going to be able to do things that are not natural for there. It's not going to be. It's not intended to be just a typical lawn area. So you could put I guess you could. What I've seen in other places, you can put a park bench in. You can put birdhouses. You can put plantings of trees that are native landscaping. So try to enhance that. But that will be covered in the CCNRs, and the CCNRs will reference the Protection Area Management Plan, which will be produced and reviewed and provided by the wetland biologist, and also be reviewed by the city staff when we go through the final engineering and final review process. Yes.
On that area, it sounds as though you're going to anticipate putting specialty, naturally occurring plants in that area.
Yeah, the idea is to have
I'm
native
wondering
plants.
about, it's easy enough for us as experts, or you as an expert, to know what those things are. Is that going to be planted before the property is sold, or are the homeowners who may or may not have the skill or knowledge to put that kind of landscape in, are they going to be settled with it?
Good question. Typically, we would, depending on the final buffer mitigation or the final buffer enhancements that are required by the wetland biologist, that would be put in at the time after all the streets get built and the final plat's recorded as one of the last steps, and also when the fence would get put in. So they would, and then they also would plant that area so that when it starts off with approved plants and it's got some plantings in there. And then also, if people want to enhance it in the future, then there would be an approved list of plantings that would be allowed to be added. And typically, they're just whatever is a native plant. So you can't plant, Florida wild grass or a Georgia pine or something in there. They want to use Douglas fir, cedar, any kind of red osier dogwood, those type of plants that provide habitat for native species.
Okay,
So it will be planted by the developer in the development initially, and then if there will also be an additional list of allowed future plantings or enhancements to choose from.
That's a nice complete answer for me. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
all right. And there was one question raised about the ability to, the 25-foot buffer on the outer. So if, for example, on lot number 8, this is the building envelope that you see here. So this 20 foot will be used for, or 26 feet will actually be paved access. And then we have our front yard setback, and then the house will be set back in here. So this is the building envelope, and then the edge of the 50-foot buffer is actually this line right here. So there'll be at least a 5-foot separation between the back of the house and the edge of the buffer. So then I guess the question is for this buffer, and I've seen it done both ways, and so it can be successful both ways, but I guess it's a little bit something that we can discuss. But you can have over the entire 50-foot buffer, you can have a access easement that would allow anyone in the subdivision, or I guess in this case we're going to have at least on the 25-foot buffer, we're going to have this easement that allows the public access on this gravel surface trail. But in this area here, in the outer 25 feet, that could be the primary responsibility of for example, of lot 8 here. They would also maintain this area with the native species plantings over time. Or if you wanted to, the other option is to provide that in the funding mechanism of the HOA, and then allow that, they can still maintain it, but if someone doesn't maintain it, then that would allow the HOA to step in and maintain that area if someone was not doing it correctly. But when the, I guess this might be a good time to actually talk about the HOA documents. So there was a lot of questions about the HOA and how it should be funded. And what we will do is we will provide an HOA document with CC&Rs, and it also will refer to, again, to the will be subject to the developer's development agreement that the city will be reviewing. It's a legal binding document. All those documents are attached to each individual property and lot at the time the final plat's recorded, so that in perpetuity, you know, that document, anytime someone buys or sells a house, that gets provided as part of their closing documents. So they're aware of it. And somebody had asked about the funding. It's critical. It has to be funded correctly. And what we've done on other developments that are successful with HOAs, and you have private open spaces and private roads, is that we try to actually fund with when you actually close the house, the first lot when you sell it, is that we go ahead and include, for example, the first 1 or 2 years annual assessments within the part of the closing. So you actually fund, you start the HOA with some funds right up front. Because what happens, the ones that do fail, or the ones that aren't successful as HOAs, are the ones that people have to come in later, and then they try to say, well, oh yeah, we have a $100 a year or $200 a year annual assessment on your lot. Well, we haven't had to pay it for the first 2 years. Why do we start now? But if you start right at the beginning, and then the title company actually collects that money when they close the house, then it's already set up, and that's more than half the battle right there. So that's what we're planning on doing with this HOA agreement, and we'll have that together to review with, the city will be able to review it, and the city attorney. And so we try to be pretty complete with that, make sure we have funding, make sure that it spells out the responsibilities of the homeowner, and what they're allowed to do, what they won't be allowed to do in the open space, and then also it'll demonstrate and allow whatever limitations are on access. The gate issue, for example, will be spelled out that in the CC&Rs and the HOA document, that the gates would be required to be maintained. And then a lot of that, as far as the buffer area, it becomes self-policing. If the people see it in their HOA documents and they see it that it's attached to the property, they don't want the next door neighbor putting in a shed, or if the next door neighbor is starting to go out there and cut down a bunch of trees that are problem, that should be there, then that's they're not allowed to do that. And so then the CC&Rs will be established with a homeowner association. There's usually a board of directors, and then there'll be a process. It's all spelled out on how officers are elected, and then they choose a board. And so I've been involved with many HOAs and helped set those up on a wide range of projects that involve private streets, involve wetlands, open spaces, critical areas, trails. And so I have a pretty good document and starting point where we're going to do that. We'll customize that to fit this project as best as we can. So the main points are that it will be funded. It'll be funded in perpetuity. And the other criteria or condition, or I guess ability, or what's the word, language we'll insert in there, is that if there's some portion of the standards that need to be enforced for public health, safety, welfare, or that the city has an interest in, that the city can step in if the HOA doesn't do it. So that's also very critical. And you won't see that in a lot of them. So that is something we like to that will be included. Okay, let's see here. This being a project that will be subject to the developers agreements, it does have a whole nother layer of additional regulations because of that. So that will make sure that these rules are followed. There was a question about a maintenance agreement for the road access, and yes, each of the private roads will be privately maintained, and that also will be built into the funding. One of the other aspects of we'll put together kind of a rough budget for maintenance of what it would take to maintain the wetland and the trail and also the private roads. So I'm not sure if it's best to, have the maintenance, for example, of all the houses 1 through 5 that access off of Bailey Court, if those would all just share, or maybe the entire HOA would help fund that. But we can do it. We've done it both ways, but we'll work out those details so that there will be maintenance provided. There was a question about private streets and naming the streets. So after the Emerald project, it was decided that each of the private streets would need to be named. And so I'm not sure if you can see it, but this one is actually Greenway Court. And so for addressing purposes, this will be Greenway Court, this is Forest Trail Circle, this is Westboro Way, and this is Bailey Court. So each of the private streets will have an address. And that was a request to make sure that we are consistent with emergency services and 911 so they can locate it. And they will also have a sign. It'll be a private street sign, but there will be a street sign to allow someone to find the street. Let's see here. As I said before, each Bailey Court and also Greenway were both designed to be less than 150 feet long, which meets the standard of the city, the city road standards for private streets. However, we thought that to provide, the maximum ability to make this connection through here or possible connection if needed was a 20-foot wide emergency or fire access. So we'll work with the fire marshal closely on that to make sure that we get something that's acceptable to everybody.
Is that 20-foot easement going to be only for emergency, or are kids going to take a shortcut across there to get to school? Or
it's
going to be private lots, right?
Yeah, they're private lots. If it ends up being a gate, I mean, it's not going to be. You're going to be walking through. This will be the front properties here. Ideally, that people will love this trail and they'll be taking this trail instead. So that's what we'd like to promote. I mean, you can't.
This nice big paved thing there.
Yeah, it's a paved, but it's like any other emergency access. People tend to they can, if they have another option. If there wasn't another option, I'd say yes. But with another option, I think that's what we're trying to encourage. Well, I guess you can't technically prohibit somebody, but if someone's walking across a property and it says private property, then I guess. I
just didn't know how the gating would be set up.
I'm not sure what the fire marshal's going to end up doing. If it's going to be more just a metal pipe gate with that they can, with a lock that they can open, or if it's going to be more like a solid type gate. I'm not sure exactly what he has in mind, but we'll figure that out. Okay, so there's also a question on building height, and I confirmed with Rich that there won't be any buildings taller than 30 feet tall. 30 feet is pretty tall building, so unless you got deep pockets on that one, Rich, that's pretty, okay. There was a question about the drainage, the proposal. I've done a preliminary stormwater report, and what you got was just the synopsis, and I've got about a 50-page preliminary hydraulics analysis drainage report, which I will submit into the record so that if anybody wants to look at it or has more questions. But in essence, we're able to meet the standard, the city standard for detention, which in essence is that for the 25-year post-developed drainage storm, we are actually detaining the stormwater that leaves the site to the 10-year pre-developed condition. So no more water when after the site is developed, less than or equal to water that currently leaves the site will be leaving the site. So we won't be impacting the downstream conditions.
Will all the water, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Will all the water be placed in the buffer towards the wetland, all to the wetland, or will it go into the stormwater system? So.
Good question. We've, when talking with the city, they actually prefer to try to utilize the buffers as much as possible for the wetland. And I don't know if this showed up in your packet. I also have a more recent version of this plans, which I can give everyone. What's the date, the version that you have right now? What's your version of plans you have on the far right-hand side in the middle? Does it say April or May, March?
March 8th.
March 8th. Okay, so I have a plan here that's dated April 5th. And so on that, I don't know if it probably doesn't show up on yours, but after there was concern raised by the neighbors, let's just go ahead and hand those out to everybody out there. Actually, give me one of them so I have one there. Thanks. Please. There you go. Make yourself useful. Okay. But on there, if you look at sheet number 3, or I'm sorry, sheet number 4.
We can share.
Thank you.
We can share over here too.
Which one are you on?
Which
Yeah, if
one
you
are
look at
on?
look at the plan set I just hand out, sheet number 4, the composites and storm utility plan, not the Strom plan. it's the storm.
Spreader bar.
So the way it's designed is that we try to minimize it. Instead of having one large outfall like you mentioned that might cause problems, we have at least 3 or 4 different discharge points. So the primary discharge point for the Forest Trail Circle would be, there'll be a catch basin at the end of the cul-de-sac and Forest Trail Circle, and then it'll run down along the west side of lot number 10. And then at the, as it starts coming into that 50-foot buffer, the outer edges of the buffer, then along there we'll run a very shallow diversion conveyance spreader trench. So basically, if you had kind of just a very slight slope and you dug a little triangle V ditch in and you made it say 50 feet long, and then you piled up on the downhill side the material you took out. The idea is the water comes down and then it's allowed to spread out laterally, and then as that fills up, and then it'll trickle over the edge of the diversion berm and then trickle through the outer edges of the wetland down into through the buffer, and then ultimately they make their way to the wetland. And so that accomplishes a couple of different things quite nicely in a natural way. Is that after the ditch, the shallow diversion ditch is built, it ends up getting vegetated, grows up, you minimize erosion, and then you also have the distance, 40 plus feet of distance from that diversion ditch down to the wetland, which allows the water to trickle through the buffer. It's at a very slow rate, and it also helps. That's probably one of the best treatment methods there is out there, is to use natural vegetation on a buffer. It's just the same thing we do with a grassy swale, or the big new term today is bioretention. So we're doing bioretention in a very effective manner and with low rates. So there's one facility, one diversion berm along lot 10. There's another one that would end up being along lots 8 and 9 in the very edge of the buffer. There's another one along the back of lots 6 and 7. And then there's also going to be one that's west of lot number 3, and it kind of will run along Sykes Road. And so we'll pick up the water from Bailey Court and run it through that. And then the water that's along Sykes Road will be picked up, diverted, put in a pipe, and then it'll actually kind of bypass the wetland, because we didn't want to put too much water in there, and then allow it to continue on as it currently does farther to the east along Sykes Road. And there's another culvert that runs under, a pipe that runs under Mountain View Drive, that the water would go into and continue on its path as it currently does to the east. So we've probably done more than we would typically do at this point of the project, but because there were several questions of the storm that were raised, one, to make sure, number one, that it was feasible, number two, that we had a design that was complementary to the site, number three, it'll help treat the water. It won't help, it'll treat the water, we'll detain the water. We're not going to increase the impact of the detention, with our detention facilities, but we won't increase the impact to the downstream. We'll meet the code, and then it's also going to be more of a natural solution to treat and allow the water to slowly trickle its way and find its way to where it goes now.
So it's good that the stormwater is going into the wetland. It could use more water, but I was looking at the LiDAR topography of this area, and there's really not much fall in this to the northeast where the wetland goes towards, so it's not going to flood those property owners by more water into there.
There is
It's not more water, it's just more concentrated, because all that water's going down there anyway.
Right, all that water goes there now. The timing of it is slightly different, as you just said. There is, Rich has been out to the site. There is kind of there's a catch basin. If you're looking at this plan, it's off of. There's at least 2 pipes. I think there's actually 3 pipes that are underneath the mountain. Two
pipes, and there's one that catches the catch basin.
Right.
So there's 3 total.
Three total, right? And so we actually went out there, and Rich took pictures. We actually had this surveyed, and so based on the elevations down there, our calculations are showing us that we won't raise the level or increase the level of the water in there. There's enough capacity in the existing pipes that go underneath Mountain View Drive that it won't back up. And in fact, we did ask the maintenance at the city if there had been any problems there, and they said there really wasn't any record of the water topping over. And then one of the neighbors had said that there might have been a problem, but that was only during like an ice storm. So as long as it's maintained, it appears that it functions properly. And our calculations and our analysis show that we won't be raising the water, downstream. So, if someone has a problem with their crawl space, that's really beyond the scope of our project. We can't control that. Their house might have been built a little bit lower. They might have to, dry out their crawl space or pump it out or whatever. But, we're not going to be making it worse by the project. So I guess that's the key point. Was there, I guess, is there any other questions on the stormwater, or I guess I spent a little bit of time on that, but I thought it was kind of important based on the previous discussions, and there's a lot of questions about that. So I just want to make sure that everybody had a good understanding and that was comfortable with what we're trying to do here. We're not just going to, pour water on someone without thinking about what we're doing. So I want to make sure we're meeting the code and we have a good solution. Okay. Moving on, the other issue that was discussed the protection area management plan. I briefly discussed that. That will be prepared by the wetland biologist and will be reviewed by the city to make sure it's compliant with the development agreement in its final form, and as well as the city code. There was a question about the limits of the buffer and how will people know where their properties are at. So as part of the final plat, one of the requirements of getting a final plat is you have to go in and set a property pin at every corner, every lot corner. That's a requirement that the surveyor has to do. It's measured to the nearest hundredth of a foot, and they have to put those in. So there will be a property pin everywhere. I mean, the only question I guess that remains is what the commission feels comfortable or would want to, if you just feel comfortable with us working out a solution with city staff on the best way to implement this outer 25 feet. If that's something we should just go ahead and put my thought would be to put at least put the entire 50 feet within a common easement so that people, even though this area is part of Lot 8, it's allowed that someone could, I guess, utilize or come in on this side over here, unless you choose to put a fence. If you're okay with us putting a fence at the 25 feet, and then this would just be habitat, natural buffer area that would be maintained by Lot 8, and then if they didn't, then it would be maintained by the HOA. But we could also do it that way, so that then we could put the fence here, and with the gate to allow access. So there's 2 ways to do that. And I'm open to it. If you want us to work with staff, we can do that and come up with the best solution. Or if you had some suggestions, I could try to answer some questions on that as well. But I do think that having an easement over the entire 50-foot, the 25 feet will be part of the wetland tract, as Jacob had mentioned, but the outer 25 feet is the question of whether that would be, who would be allowed to have access on that. Did you have any particular suggestion on that, on how you do it?
I think if they're concerned about the property lines, having them set, number one, is one solution to it. And the other solution would be if they're really concerned about that 25 feet, move the fence down. But I think I would just leave it a general easement for anybody to access it. You can't build a wetland easement. You can't put a garden fence. You can't do anything.
And that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Just leave it general.
Yeah.
And that's what I was getting at before. So I think that's the best route.
Okay. Okay.
Not to belabor the stormwater, but I just have one more question about it in this new plans you gave us.
Mhm.
Looks like you have a couple of pipes going deep into the wetlands there, out of those spreader bars.
Let's take a look here.
Is that, you didn't say you were gonna have it into the wetland, you said you're gonna do it in the buffer.
Yeah,
Like
I guess
Behind 10 and 9 and,
I'm not sure. This version, I thought I had those, thought I had my drafter take those off. There's not supposed to be one there. It's supposed to not, we're not, I was purposely designing it to not go past the diversion berms or
Okay,
the
so all those
spreaders. So there's 1, 2,
pipes,
3.
three.
They would be there, yeah.
okay, all right, good.
I didn't catch that. Did you have anything else, Rich, you wanted to ask or add?
I didn't know they've had questions of me, the structures I'm building are, it's kind of a unique area. It's not a tract home because every lot is different. You're not gonna see the exact same house on every lot. It's every one I'll personally pick to fit that lot in the area I'm trying to build, I'm kind of looking at the craftsman style. Just trying to make a good looking neighborhood. James been a great resource, and Jacob's been a great resource. I'm a builder, and I'm leaning heavy on him because this is a difficult one. But like I said, what really intrigues me is the different shaped lot, because we are going to have something different on every lot. It won't be this house and that house and that house over and over and over.
You're gonna build them all, you're not gonna sell the lots for other builders to build on?
Just for Rich Bailey Construction. They asked me a year ago why I did this. No, it's gonna be good. Yeah, like both my people are local people I employ. This process right here will bring into the city over $200,000 just in FCC school taxes and all that stuff too. It's gonna happen. I mean, if it's not me, it's somebody else. Trying to do as much local as I can.
And I think that's a great point, and that also came up at the Emerald Meadows, is that every time we assess or provide some other additional regulation on there, what usually ends up happening is it ends up adding to the cost of the development. Ultimately, what that ends up doing is just making the base price of the lots, the land, the developed lots more expensive, and that ultimately triggers having a higher starting point for your housing. So, whatever we can do to make a nice development, have it comply with the codes, the standards, and then also try to make it as affordable as we can. That's why we also wanted to go down to allow as small as 6,000 square feet while maintaining the 7,000 square foot lot average, so we can be, halfway compatible with the neighbors, yet it will allow, some more units on there to provide more housing opportunities for people. Because, if we had a 10,000 square foot lot there, you would have, very high income, higher income level homes, and not everybody can afford that. And I think with what Rich is, wanting in his vision here, is that we'll have something that is going to appeal to and be available to a wider range of buyers and homeowners, which is, I think, also in the interest of the city. So I think that's a good compromise on everything there. Did anybody else have any questions, or be happy to answer them? If I guess we can let someone else talk, but if there's any other questions come up, be happy to, and would reserve the right to come up and make sure everything gets explained in a way that makes sense and get everybody's questions in.
Oh, yeah, we'll ask you back.
Okay.
Thanks for showing up this time.
Very good.
My defense, I actually didn't know the first one was happening, so.
We might even pay you tonight.
That was good. He appreciates me now this time.
Public record.
All right. Okay, do we have any testimony in support of this application? Come on up. What's your name and address?
So my name's Don Maywald. My wife Jenny and I are the ones that own the property just north of the development. And it's just for us, when we bought this property, it was about 6 years ago, we never anticipated seeing anybody develop it this soon, quite honestly. We figured it'd be 15, 20 years out the way the economy was going. So it's really, it is a surprise to see it, but it's also not something that we didn't expect eventually to happen. It's going to be developed. It's in the city limits. So the question is to us is how was it going to be developed? Knowing Rich Bailey's history and his reputation, I am happy to see somebody local with that reputation putting the effort into building on this property rather than somebody from outside the area slapping together vinyl wrapped homes that all look the same. I think that this is definitely has potential being a good neighborhood. Maybe a little bit sooner than what we were hoping to see, but it's definitely, I think, would be a good addition to the area. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else in favor? Do we have anybody, neutral testimony? All right, seeing none, do we have any testimony in opposition of this application? Would you come on up?
My name is Larry Scott. I live at 59309 Mountain View Drive. I'm right there where the ditch where it drains out. And just to let you know, I'm the one that's been maintaining it. Again, I'm going to mention the city does not. They don't know what's going on there at all. So I'm the one that's been making sure that the grading's been cleaned out. I've been the one to making sure it's draining and taking care of it. I'm the one that's been making sure the rock's raked back. If kids do get in it, something like that, to which kids will be kids, and they'll do that. It's a minimum drain, I'm going to tell you right now. It is a minimum drain right now. If one year we got a lot of snow and got a lot of water and stuff, and it came down there since I've lived there, and it filled the grading up, it filled it up, went up over the curb, ran like a river, right smack down the street and right straight down towards Sykes Road. So there is a drainage problem there. Now Sean, as the neighbor across, you give him approval to pull the ditch in. I think that's helped. We haven't got a big rainstorm to figure out if that's good enough or not. You know, I mean, snow or rain, a big storm to come through. So my suggestion is it needs to be reevaluated. It needs to be checked out. I don't appreciate somebody that makes a comment that if the water table does come up, because they're supposed to maintain the same water table, the same flow and everything. As long as I've got plastic underneath my house and everything, it's pretty dry, stays pretty good. I don't want it to where the water table comes up and creates a bigger problem for me. And again, who is going, you talked about the homeowner association maintaining the wetland there. I don't know what they mean by that, by this maintaining it. You know, I mean, keeping it flowing or what? Is there a flow pattern down through there now? Are they gonna create a flow pattern for the water to come down through there? Is it gonna, what's the flow pattern? What's gonna be changed? That's what I wanna know. They put a culvert in. I like the idea that if a culvert does go up to Sykes Road and goes through, I think that will help a lot. You know, eliminate a lot of that water coming down off the hills, coming down. I think that'll help. But what picks up, and I'm wondering if you're gonna come off water off the houses, like my house, because, you know, houses, you know, the beads, you know, the little, you know, pellets off the shingles come off, you know, and they, like mine it drains out to the street. You know, it's going to go down, it's going to go into the water system or the drainage system. That, I don't know where it would go. Where would that shingle material stuff, every year I clean my gutters out, you know, I scoop them out, sometimes stuff goes down into that. You know, they're going to convert the water, I'm sure, off the houses down to that, but it sounds like to me it's going to go down into the wetlands. How much is going to affect the wetlands and affect the nature, you know? That's just my thinking. That's all that is, no more than that. But I would like the city to, like I said, I'm maintaining it. I'm maintaining the flow. If you're gonna have a flow pattern, we got a culvert underneath there, and there's only two. The one I'm maintaining is the only one that's taking the water right now. That's it. That's all it's taking. Believe me, it floods out. It does flood out. I dug it deeper to try to keep it flooding out, but it's still that it only takes so much water. A pipe only takes so much water. That's it. You can't get any more water in a pipe than, that's it. So it has flood out. The one up above, there's only one I know up above. If there's a third one there, I don't know where it's at. But it's too high. And like the neighbor next to me says, the only thing that ever goes through there is the skunk family that uses it. That's it. I mean, that's all he said. I've seen anything go through it. So that's my concern is I got that wetland. What requirements am I going to have? If there's any flow patterns changed, anything happen, what do I've got to do? Because I don't want the flow patterns up towards my property, because there's on the neighbor next door, they have kind of a wall there, but I would like to see it channeled down the middle if there's a way they evaluate it or whatever it is. And if it means even put another culvert in or another pipe in, whatever it is, into a central, and then, have it distributed out. That is my biggest concern, is right there, is the water flow and the water pattern. Is it going to change, and who's going to maintain it? And what is my responsibility going to be on that? Since I'm not an HOA, I've got the water that's really takes a lot of it. Neighbor next to me, we take that water. We're getting majority of that water. It flows through there like a river. And I mean, it flows. I mean, sometimes it really comes down there pretty fast. What I like to see, if it could maintain the same, or if it even went down some, that's what I would like to see. And I don't know what the biologists and all them, what their recommendation is we want more water, you want less water, where does it maintain at? And that's my concern. Right now, I'm fine with it the way it flows now, as long as we can keep it the flow at right now. There's no problem. But we do have a flow with the discharge on the pipe when it really, really rains, and it really does start backing up. And so that is my concern, my about it is, I'm not, I just want to know where I stand, where I'm at on this, since I do have the one pipe, basically, I'm taking care of. And if the city, are they going to go ahead possibly in the future, do they want to take on the responsibility of making sure the HOA and the water is flowing correctly and properly down through there at that level and maintaining it? So that is my concern. So I want to thank you for listening to me, and you have a good evening. Okay.
Thank you very much.
I have a question for you.
Here.
So, besides this hearing and a previous hearing, have you notified the city of you maintaining the culvert or the pipe?
No, I have not. I put it this way: I've always just did it, and if it overflowed, but I figured, hey, you know what? We've had a problem. Hey, now's the time to bring the issue up. Now's the time, since it's all going on here. I've watched it really, really close and make sure that, the leaves and everything. We got a lot of water, the leaves come down through there, and I'm the one that goes out there and pulls all the leaves away from the grading, make sure that it's flowing and make sure it's doing all right. But we have had really, really serious rains that it had overflowed. It's overflowed enough where it went just over the sidewalk into it, and then one time it got bad enough, but it went down the street. It went just flowed on down the street. Just have a river going down the street. So the street basically picked up the overflow, the problem. So, okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
We might respond that the applicant did provide the planning commission with a analysis, preliminary hydraulic analysis and drainage report, which does define what their proposal is as far as where the water is to go. So there is a report that is part of the record. So you might be interested in reviewing that. We just received that tonight.
Do we have anybody else opposed? Please come forward.
I'm Vicki Noost. I live at 34854 Westboro Way. I'm pretty disheartened by the plan in regards mostly to the wetlands. They are substantial. They are not, I'm not sure what the city regards wetlands as. It sounds like almost like we'd like to get rid of them. But what we have in that wetland is very special. We have a variety of wildlife that come through on a routine basis. We have deer, skunk, duck, coyote. What else have we seen? I might be missing something, but there's a lot of wildlife because it's a beautiful place. And I feel like we're just going to carve it up and culvert it and chain link fence it and make those animals unable to use it. And I'm not sure what a wetland is designated for. Is it for the wildlife or is it for us? Doing a reducing minimum lot size and minimum setback fee in order to plug more houses in is so short-sighted to me. I know it will create cheaper housing. I know it will create more of a tax base. And I know that it will create a better pocket for developers and anybody involved. But what are we really looking for in this city? Are we looking for a substantial, is it where people would want to live? I've seen other subdivisions that have been done in this town, including the McNulty School, the McBride School, the Oak Ridge subdivision, where they've taken wetlands and pretty much moved them destructively, where McBride School was, where now I think the Oak Ridge, I can't remember the street name, has the same kind of a situation with a path and a culverted, gated wetland that we're not supposed to go in. And I'm not sure anything else would, because access is so deprived and it's just an excuse for a wetland. I think it's important. And I think reducing lot sizes to plug in more houses and say that the average lot size is over the minimum requirement for our zoning is ridiculous and sad, and I hope that you won't go with that. Diversion berms. I don't understand this whole thing with this wetland. I mean, if we do this and we culvert it or we gate it, and I'm against putting gates in the back of anybody's lots so that they can have access to the next 25 feet that belongs to them, even though it is a wetland and they shouldn't be walking in it and messing with it. It should be a wetland. I'm just completely against how that's being diversion berms and I can't remember all the different things. The culverts will destroy the wetland. It won't be what it was, and I'm sure that, to me, that's very important because we have very few of those left in this town. And I'm not sure what we're looking for. Maybe the city needs to look at livability and future and not just condensed housing and low-income housing. Seems like we're doing that a lot, and we're destroying a lot of it. So that's what I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Next.
God help me here. I'm Daniel Kepke, 34815 Westboro Way. I wrote so much down. This is upsetting. This is very upsetting. Looking at these little maps and everybody staring at the little piece of paper, this does us no justice. I live right up the top of that. There is no way you can stand up there and see more than 6 or 7 houses going in there and have it even mimic the neighborhood. I mean, it is a weird sized lot. You can take right now 6 or 7 houses, and then you got to roll for another bed of houses, right? not for another road. I mean, this is a joke. You get like hypnotized looking at that thing. If you can actually visualize, see those other lots on both sides, you can't even see them on those. It is nothing like that cluster. I mean, why don't they put a Walmart there, huh? You guys want some money? What are you doing to everybody in that neighborhood who's already here, already paying taxes? Yeah, some people knew that someday this would change, but change like that? Seriously, would you want that in your backyard? There is a lot of children on these streets here. Seriously, no. Swear to God, there are a lot of children on these streets here. You know how many cars that's going to be bombing up and down through there? We have enough problem with people keeping the speed limit one particular family, let alone people going a lot further down that road. Who's going to be liable for that, huh? And I remember how this started out. Oh, I'm just trying to make a living, Rich Bailey says. Just trying to make a living. Baloney. This is making a killing. That ain't making a living. If Rich never made another penny in his life, he's made a living. There's no reason for what this is in that area. It's totally out of bounds. And what to say about the wildlife and the wetlands, that's going to destroy that whole neighborhood as far as that goes. There's deer that walk through there. It's a beautiful place. I mean, that's just so out of character for that neighborhood. You guys can get your houses. There's lots of areas around here to build, but to try to climb 18 houses in between a wetland and power lines, and I mean, where's the common sense here, guys? Why don't we have that meeting over there and you look at what it looks like? I mean, we got a guy over here, I don't know what your job is, but he's justifying putting 18 houses here. We need another person over here saying, no, that's a bad idea, because if you do that. I want this fair, that's all I want. I feel it's such a disadvantage right now. These guys know you. They deal with you all the time. I don't know how many subdivisions Rich has made. A lot of you guys. These guys know the ropes. We're at their mercy over here. We don't know all the ins and outs and what you guys look for and don't look for. I got a feeling you want the tax money, but you'll get that. In the long run, you get more if you build quality type setups all around instead of crunching a bunch together. And it's said that they'll be cheaper. Well, say what you want now. I just think it's a bad idea. I think it's greedy. I think it's hurting a lot of people in that neighborhood to satisfy one soul's family. And I do want you to consider the people who are here already. I mean, I swear, I wake up every morning, and that's where I stand to have my coffee. And another thing is, I don't know that report you guys got about the wetlands part. Where does that actually start? You get within about 100 feet of that creek or whatever that is down there, and that ground is getting soft below your feet already. Where does the wetland start there? And why do we have the laws to protect the wetlands if we're going to make all these, 25 feet will be for the people, and we'll just put a fence there, and, we're making all these other people responsible for the laws you guys already have in place about building there. That is wrong to begin with. And, we'll put bird feeders, and we'll do this, that. This is like politicians talking candy. Why don't we just build a practical setup there in the first place? Why all these justifications and overrides and all this we're doing here? Look at it. You guys are fooling yourself by looking at that piece of paper. That is not the property. You stand on that property and you look at what this is. And even those streets, these private streets, where they're paved, where's that water running off to? I mean, you guys are, who's liable for the damage if something happens here downstream with all these people that have raised concerns at the prior meeting? Who's liable for that then? Who's liable for it? It's a serious question. Nobody knows? Good. That's good. Yeah, you're messing with stuff. You're putting a lot of concrete and a lot of buildings there. And we're going on these studies like the fish ladders. That would take care of the salmon. They won't die off if we put fish ladders, right? I think we're overriding a lot of common sense by a lot of almost pseudoscience, if you guys understand what I'm saying about this water runoff stuff. I think they've got their outcome they desire and are looking for ways to justify it instead of the other way around. I'm sorry if I come off bad, but I think it's a selfish thing to do, Rich. You don't need the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in opposition? Please come forward.
Well, I'm not really opposite. I'm kind of neutral, down the middle. My name is John Pinot, 34837 Westboro Way. Thank you for your time. And may God himself come upon this area and all of us picked the right choice for St. Helens. When I first moved here and what I heard about this man here, I think it's wrong to judge a man's character like that. That being said, this is a slice and dice, but everybody needs to make a little bit of money. What I'm hoping you guys do is remember what St. Helens is to you. To me, it's property rights, common sense, everything my neighbors were saying, the water rushes down onto them. I don't really think about that because I'm on top of the hill. These guys are I saw it's a partnership that they're searching to do with our city. Two of the things that disturbed me at the beginning of this is that this man talks with lawyers, and this man has an attitude that you can destroy another neighborhood's property to build a neighbor. That's wrong. So, the deer are there, all the animals are there, but we hunt, we fish. They probably shouldn't cut through the area. This, we can give them something. The man can make some money. He can be nicer with our neighbors. He doesn't have to use his lawyers, and we can get the right kind of revenue coming in if you make the right choices. That's pretty much how this goes. I've been here 12 years, been on top of that hill. As for birds and planting your thing, when we first moved in there, there was a whole forest. Guys came in and dumped half the forest. Wow, that was pretty depressing, but that's progress. Now we got men coming in, they're gonna pump a lot of water. I don't know if the volume is going to increase or not. That depends on how much God puts onto the earth. But I can tell you that the amount of flow that goes through the creek through my backyard is cutting away half my mountain, or what I consider my mountain. We're sending it all down the Minolta Creek. That's runoff. It's not a natural creek, so I'm assuming you guys are tapping into that drain, and then maybe the one on my property and down to the end. I could be wrong. I agree with the gentleman over here. You should take a walk up through that place before you let any of these guys tell you what it is. Go look at your neighbors. Go talk to your neighbors there. I know we've gone through all our stuff. I still think every man deserves to make a dollar. It's just how we make it. We work for jobs here. This man brings them in. God bless you. Now, let's figure it out. Let's stop all this crap and let's cut this down to sensibleness. You don't have a road yet. You're hoping you get the road, put a road to it. You have an endless revenue on your HOA. That's a fantastic model. Woo! I never thought of that. Endless revenue forever for the sucker that buys it too the next time. You don't have any access to your land. You got to hope like hell that your neighbors, you can live with them, and they don't have a gate that's too wide to take up the 10 feet of the land that you get to walk on, which is going to be probably too wet to begin with. And I know I'm not acting very neutral when I said it was, so I apologize. I love this place. It's pretty cool there. We live next to the sanctuary. We got every animal there is, and you ought to come up and look. So thank you for bringing jobs. It's a bitch out there. You need to work better with your so what with the water in other people's land. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'm quite neutral. I just want to share some of my concerns.
State your name and address, please.
Okay. My name is Susan Pinto, and my address is 34837 Westboro Way. I'm a city girl. I grew up in Portland, so North Portland. Very structured, very small lots. I love living in St. Helens. The property, the land space that I can have. I actually have green space, or I can just have trees, whatever. I can have lawn. I love the fact that there's nature constantly around me. When I saw this come in the mail the first time, I was not able to come back in the first meeting in March. I was unavailable. But when I saw this 18 parcels, I was like, that's not that big of a property. It scares me. That's like city living. And it's like, when I moved to St. Helens, I love the suburb, the little areas of the larger lots. that's not the same as our neighborhood, our street, that it's going to cut the size there. And that's what's startling me a little bit. It's changing that dynamic. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's a lot of houses in one small area. As a parent and seeing the kids on that, because we're at the top of that area and it's a dead end, with this new build, all the cars are going to come around that corner, and it's going to be a little scary because they will drive fast up that hill because it's a hill. So they're going to speed to get up the hill and fly around that corner. And I've got kids to think about in the neighborhood. So that is a little of a concern to me. The amount of housing that will be there, with that means for every house, there's probably 2 cars that are coming. So that's, maybe more, but 2. I'm going with the middle. So that's a lot more traffic up that road. It's going to change our neighborhood. It's not going to be as friendly for the kids in the neighborhood. I think that it's important to have the different housing, so I think that it's wonderful to have the different lot sizes and small sizes. My question really is, what's the size of the houses going to be? Like, is it going to be really small, or are they going to be monstrous and take up the whole lot space? I'm thinking that way too, because that makes the difference in the housing in the neighborhood and how the neighborhood feels. So those are really big concerns. The runoff water is a concern, just because I do know, again, we live at the top, and we do have the creek at the bottom of our property in the back, and it drapes off. We don't have the water threatening our property as much, but I definitely know the neighbors at the bottom of that hill get a lot of water, and it's the runoff down the street that fills that as well. So I am concerned for them as well. I'm concerned for that part. It just seems like a lot in such a little space. I mean, we have larger property. I don't expect every house to have that larger property, but it just seems so tight. And I don't want to live in the city. I moved out here in the smaller city. I didn't want to live in Portland. I moved for a reason, and we just need to be careful of not trying to be too much like other types of living. People are moving out here for a reason. It's not to live like they were in those other areas. So just be careful on that decision. Really, those are the concerns I had. I think that you guys addressed the other concerns as you guys were talking. So like safety of the cul-de-sac and sidewalk. If you're driving up on the sidewalk because they're rolling curves, how safe is that for kids? And things. I'm just a little concerned of those things. Family friendly. So thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. And we're all here to donate our time to listen to the public, so this is why we're up here.
I'm sorry, this is Dan Kepke again, 34815 Westboro Way. There was one thing that really concerned me that I didn't know until tonight. I've been in a bad car wreck before. When you come out on the road where I live, Westboro, what is it, Sykes? Or whatever that street? That there's a curve on that road there, and it's very tight pulling out right there, knowing if somebody's coming around that curve or not. I can't imagine 2 other private roads. I don't know if anybody's looked at the safety. I'm bringing that up as concern, because it's pretty hairy where I live. I got to really make sure there's nobody coming. If you're going any further towards that curve, that might be a little dangerous. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else in opposition? All right, could we have the applicant come back and address anything they'd like to talk about?
I didn't know I was such a hated man. I've never done a subdivision, so this is why it's good that I'm dabbling in this. I'm trying to make a living. I don't know where to get this information. I'm a local man. I'm raised here. I don't know where these people got this idea of Rich Bailey being such a money-grubbing guy. I'm not. This is my first go-around at a subdivision, okay? I'm trying to do the best thing I can do for the city that I've been in my whole life. I graduated from this high school. I don't want people telling me that I'm not a local person. I'm doing the best I can. We are going by what the city tells us we have to do. We're trying to meet all your requirements. I'm building nice homes, employing good people, And I just don't know where I'm getting this, so I'm just this out here to make a buck. I see some of my lots are bigger than the neighbors' lots. And they're telling me I'm trying to cram them in. My lots are as big as theirs, or bigger. Right there, it says 7,000 feet. Right there, 7,067 feet.
I was trying to figure if that's to the northwest, but one on the north, is it northwest? Is 7,000?
There's two of them there.
Ones, these are the existing lots with houses on them
But they're
right
telling me
now.
that my lots are small.
Some of yours are bigger than these that are listed with the square footage that's built.
I'm sorry I'm upset, but
No, I
didn't come
understand.
here to get bashed because I'm not a dishonest person. I'm just trying to make a living. Like I said, this is my first go around with subdivision. I'm not a big developer like people think I am. I don't know where they get that. I got a white Ford that drives around town. You want to see me in the street? A lot of these neighbors have talked to me in the neighborhood. I've stopped by to make sure the wetland's not running over. I've talked to them where that wetland is, and I confirmed with them today where the wetland was. And it rained hard for the last 3 days. You know, I just don't know what, I just think it's inappropriate to bash me as a person when I've been a good, law-abiding citizen of this town forever. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. I just wanted to point out that there's a mention about property rights, and I think this is probably a good example of when there is a property that it is the right of the owner to be able to develop it and follow the same rules and guidelines that everybody else has and that the city has in place. And that's what I think this application does, is we're making a good application and it follows the rules and regulations that have been voted in place by the citizens of St. Helens. And so I know it's not an easy position where you're at because you hear all sides of the story, but I think that it's a good balance of where we're trying to get to, and I think we'll get there. And so I did want to point out there seemed to be maybe some confusion, but the wetland itself, if you look at the plan, this is a wetland here, this area, this dashed line right here. This is the edge of the wetland. That's the actual wetland. That was delineated by a licensed wetland biologist, went out there in the field and looked at the vegetation, looked at the soil conditions, looked at the hydrology, and determined, according to the state regulations and how they delineate a wetland, that this is the edge of the wetland. So I just want to make it clear that on our site, anywhere in this wetland, there's not one tree, there's not one pipe, there's nothing happening in here at all. That's all going to stay the same. So it's all being protected in accordance with all the regulations. And then this extra buffer is to provide a transition from wherever you're developing to the edge of the wetland buffer, or the edge of the wetland, I'm sorry. So this buffer area is additional area. And the whole reason why we're here today and talking about a planned development and a developer agreement and all these things here is to try to address the fact that we are wanting to maintain this wetland, and we also are trying to figure out a way to, the best way that we can transition from the housing to a buffer to the wetland. So, and then also all the trees that are in the buffer area, I think there might be 2, but I think we're able to preserve almost every single tree in there too. So we're not planning on taking out a bunch of trees. The trees up in the area that's zoned for R17 development, and these trees will, in order for the development, will have to come out. But everything that's down in the buffer or in the wetland will be preserved in accordance with the regulations. There were a couple, I guess a couple questions about, let's see, balance. I guess those are the main issues. If I'd be happy to answer any questions that the audience had brought up. If there's something else that raised an issue with you, I'd be happy to answer that as well if I can.
Okay, does anybody in the commission have any other questions?
An item that was brought up about the fencing and the gates that supposedly are proposed, or are at least on the block. I live next to a wetland, next to a creek, that the feds have determined have salmon in them, but I've lived there for 30 years plus, and I've never seen a salmon or any other fish at this point. Even the crawdads aren't there anymore. But we have a 4-foot high fence that surrounds our property, and we have left 300, 400 feet in our back area for nature. I still have the deer jumping my 4-foot fence and eating all my flowers up by the house and using my driveway and jumping that fence and going to the front yard. The fence is no problem for the deer. Yes, when they have their babies in the spring, we do have to go down and open the gate and let the little critters out because they haven't figured out how to jump where. One can, another one can't. So we go down and we actually babysit them and send them out. I see no problem with a fence as long as it's not too high. Just as a warning that this is an area that can't be trounced upon. 4 feet is plenty height, I think. And yeah, the deer can jump wherever they want to go anyway. And they'll eat whatever they want, especially your flowers that you want. My roses, yeah, all of it. We can't keep out chickens that the neighbors have. I can't keep out the skunks, the possums, any of the other critters that go up and down the creek. They free will. They don't care if you have a fence there or whether you don't. They're going to do their thing, and they're going to use that property. I don't see where we have too many problems in this particular situation with the wetland. It's going to be used by the animals, believe me. They'll get in, they'll get out.
We do have the nature trail that's open.
Well, yeah, they're going to use that. The cats in the neighborhood use that because they don't like to get their paws wet. But 4 feet, I would think, would be a relative height that the deer can jump. The other critters can get up over if they so choose. They find ways around them.
We've got all those critters on First Street, too.
Oh, God, yeah, you got other critters that I don't have. So.
They're all there.
So I'd like you to,
They were
Oh,
three
yeah,
here.
and they don't
I'd like-
care about fences.
I'd like you to
Keep going.
clarify for the people that came up about maintenance of the wetlands. People think that drainages, natural streams and drainages should be maintained. By state law, they're not to be maintained for drainage, maintained for invasive species or something like that. But you don't maintain streams, you don't maintain wetlands for drainage. That's an impact to the drainage or the wetland. So I'm sure that your HOA won't have in there to maintain the wetland to drain it as efficiently as possible, because that would be against the nature of the wetland.
Correct. The whole concept, the actual wetland itself, the idea is to try to make it preserved, and it'll self-maintain. Trees will grow up, vegetation will grow up. We're not planning on digging any channels or changing the hydrology or the flow channels or anything within the wetland. That's just staying how it is. Everything that we're doing is right on the very far edges of the buffer. So we do have that transition in there, and then we're not putting any pipes in the wetland, and there shouldn't be any, if it's going to continue to drain as it currently does. We're just, making sure that the water that runs off of our site. Oh, there was a question about roof drainage, and this might be a good answer for that. So all the, and this is consistent with the other subdivision, Emerald Estates, is that we'll have a plan or a pipe for a connection for every roof. So every roofing yard will have a roof downspout drain to it that will go down and at least be piped to the dispersion conveyance swales, and so there won't be water that runs onto your neighbor's lot from the roof, so they'll have a place to go. So that's that will be addressed, and then the HOA and the maintenance and the rules around the edges of the buffer. That would be, I guess, if you had some, let's say you had an area that needed, some vegetation, you wanted to plant some more vegetation or whatnot, you could plant that. If there was a tree that became a hazard tree, I guess sometime if it was, going to fall on a house or something, that might be a situation where you might end up taking a tree that was close to that might be in the buffer, but close to a house. I've seen that before. One of the other options is that, if you were concerned about the fence, we could make the fence a common fence that was, it might be on the property line, but it would be maintained by the HOA funding mechanism. So I've seen that too. So that's another opportunity, or another option, I should say, to try to give some common ownership and common responsibility to that fence and the buffer. So we can do it. There's several ways to do it. You try to fit the best one to the project, but I don't pretend to know all the answers on those. So,
So I'd like to address that just briefly. I live in a home that's part of a homeowners association, and we have fences. And I think it is much the best that the fence is maintained by the homeowners association so that the maintenance will be consistent everywhere. It's a good idea. I'm not sure how I feel about 4-foot fence versus a 4.5-foot fence versus a,
I put a 6 foot in.
Remind
It just
everybody,
doesn't matter.
the fence pertains to the development agreement, which is the next matter, not this one. So, I mean, it's good to discuss, but that's.
Okay, well, moving on here. No other questions. And you responded. The public record is closed now, and this matter is returned to the table for deliberations and oral decision. Okay, here we are.
That's what I was just wondering.
What about the other right?
We don't say that anymore.
They can elect if they want, but we don't have to state it. No.
Oh, okay.
Took that out some time ago.
Not that long. All right.
So let me start. So obviously, first thing is approval or denial. And if you approve with conditions. There are 2 conditions if you choose to approve that I recommended in the memo dated today. That's 2.8.11 and condition 14. 2 other potential ones that were noted by the applicant. One was a modification to condition 3A, which talks about conveyance of common open space. And then there was also discussion about the 25-foot upland easement to also be an access easement for the benefit of the subdivision. The access easement, I don't really have any beef with that. Condition 3A. It's leftover land. And I don't have a problem if the adjacent property owner ends up with that. In fact, it would probably clean things up. I think my preference would be for that to be done via lot line adjustment, so it's not even part of this subdivision. However, if it does become part of this subdivision, I would only be okay with that if, along with the sale of it, or transfer, however that's done, that there's a covenant that binds that tract with that property so it cannot be sold separately. We have ran into these problems before, and it's a, I don't want to see it again. I don't like, because what happens is on some of these old subdivisions where you don't have common ownership is they don't pay their taxes. The county ends up owning it. They sell it to someone for a deal, and then someone visits us and say, hey, I got this property for a steal. What can I do with it? And I say, nothing. It's a tract. We have to avoid that situation like the bubonic plague. If I can make my statement any stronger.
So what's the cleanest way we can do?
Yeah.
The cleanest way is to leave the condition as it is and for them to do a lot line adjustment in the interim so it's not an issue.
Makes sense. All right.
So we leave it alone.
Because then it's not there. It becomes their property. It's not part of the subdivision.
So in this drawing, the full width of Westboro Way as drawn is onto that next neighbor's property, right? As drawn, but it's not really going to be built that way.
Yeah, that shows the potential dedication should that property develop.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the property ownership was flipped and they own that and developed that out, that would be a solution or something. Anyway, it'd be more costly, of course, but.
Yeah.
So being a lot line adjustment, who would own the property?
Well, the lot line so the way that would work is they would do a lot line adjustment. So the portion depicted as tract B would be acquired. So the subdivision hasn't occurred. So you have one big property, another big property. Lot line adjustment moves that property line so it's along what is going to be the right-of-way dedication. And so then the subject property is everything we see here minus 1,856 square feet.
It's part of the neighbor's property.
Yeah. So at the time of final plat, that property's not even part of it. It's been adjusted, so it belongs to the neighbor, and then, like I said, it's just not an issue. That would be the cleanest thing.
Okay.
And it'd be fantastic. Cleans it up. We don't have this weird tract.
Does the neighbor have to agree to accepting that property?
Sure, yeah. We can't just force it upon them. We can't say, what the city of St. Helens is forcing tract B
right
on
there.
your
He's right
soul.
It's going to be at their request. I mean, they're going to be the ones who want it.
Nope.
Yeah.
And his taxes will go up.
No.
Probably a little bit. The other thing, though, I should mention is in the development agreement, it talks about so let's say that this didn't come up, until 3 years from now, and the proponent is like, God, I really like that little tract. So, I lost it. But there was a place in there that says the common space needs to be owned by the association and they cannot get rid of it except by consent with the city. So if this happened 3 years from now, I'm sure the city wouldn't have a problem with it because it's not required to be connected with the property like the wetland. And so we would probably say, yeah, that's great. I don't know how you do a lot line adjustment with a tract, but we'd have to figure something out. But they know they want it now. Lot line adjustment would be the clean way to do it, and I would just, that would be my recommendation on how they handle it.
And that space, track B, was not to mitigate some other setback
No,
requirements or anything
no.
like that? Okay.
It's just a victim of geometry.
All right. So, are you done?
Do we want to?
I guess we're deliberating.
Is that 3A?
So this is too small a development to require a traffic study, is correct?
That's correct. Yeah, traffic study, traffic impact analysis is required when you have 250 more or average daily trips. Detached single-family dwelling results in 10 average daily trips, and being at only 18 lots, it's not enough to trigger it.
The 3A?
Has the city received the full water runoff analysis? Are you still waiting that?
Well, we received the
What we have?
the cover
Okay.
on a week or two ago. I can tell you exactly when.
Well, it says you received it on the 3rd.
Yeah, and then that did not include the addendums, and so we just had the the 7 pages. I didn't see the addendums until today. But as I said, our city engineer did review the analysis, and she said it made sense. Ultimately, like any subdivision, we'll do the full review after preliminary plat approval. But what the city engineer didn't say is, what the hell is this? When they say something like that, then I'm going, huh.
Okay.
Well, we should address the concern of the water, I believe. Flow. We've got an expert here.
Well, I'm a wetland scientist, I'm not a hydrologist.
What's the difference?
Big difference. That's an engineer. I know plants.
Oh, that explains everything.
Yep. They've already shown that their analysis is that they won't increase the flow off the property more than it is now.
Okay, great.
Already up the hillside, flowing down to this wetland. All that water will still go down toward the wetland. And they've done what they can to disperse it.
It's all going to be put in one area there.
I don't know the engineering of that.
Right, but will that water that's put there percolate into the ground, so maybe there won't be as much runoff to the neighbors?
What's the soil like there? So it won't percolate much.
Yeah. Nope.
Now, I want to say one other thing. I think it's in here, but the wetland was delineated and concurred with by the Oregon Department of State Lands. So this is the official boundary. It's not just a consultant's idea of where the wetlands are. Well, what's the slope like in that buffer area? Is it?
It becomes the closer you get to the wetland, it's pretty gradual. It's not very steep.
Years ago, when Metro had their Title III rule, all of the counties around of Washington County, Clackamas County, Multnomah County had to meet at least the water quality buffers of Title III. And the interesting thing about that was that really steep slopes had to have really wide buffers, and really shallow slopes could have narrower buffers because water is not going to move as fast across the slope. So St. Helens has a pretty wide buffer really for a pretty flat slope here. So just in comparison to those Title III, it's very comparable. And City of Portland and all of them have adopted at least that minimum. I have to say that I was really pleased that no wetlands are being impacted by this development. This is pretty rare in a development for not to be nicked someplace and buffer around it. I have to applaud you for that. And this was done better than the development next door that didn't have any buffers against the wetlands. And they're having problems with their houses because they're built in wetlands or built adjacent to a wetland. You got water table issues, you know, that's just the way it is. So the good thing about this site is all your houses are uphill from the wetland, and there's some slope down to the wetland, right? So you're not going to have the water table issues in the 50 feet.
All right, are we done deliberating?
No.
I'd said
I
enough
think-
here.
I think you should make the recommendation. Or make the motion. No, I'm talking about that.
Oh, yeah.
Why, let's see everything. I'll make the motion. I move that we accept the conditions as staff has written, plus the added conditions that were added later, the 2A11 and 14. And we didn't have any other adjustments. Is that correct?
Maintain 3A as it's written.
Yes, maintain 3As as written, but that's no change, so.
I'll second that.
You second it?
Yeah.
We have it moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none? Passed. Okay.
And I make a motion that chair be allowed to sign it.
I second it.
Approved?
Aye.
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 It's passed. Okay, let's see. 19. The final written decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the city council. The notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who testified or submitted comments, and the appeal deadline will be included in the notice.
If you want that notice, make sure you've signed in with your address.
Okay.
You could take a short break.
Yeah, let's have a short break before the next one.
And you were wrong. We did need our bedrolls.
Oh, man.
Well, I think we got a lot of the
Hopefully we
concerns
get
out.
a bad name in this process because the actions
Oh.
protect.
Well, you know, those guys are following. what has to be done, so.
I'm having trouble with my live feed, so you guys are not live for some reason, but you're still you're recorded though. Your mics are still live, just FYI.
My son German Shepherd Alaska Husky, stick line the fence and go over. Yeah.
Sheila, your mic is still live, just so you know. Hopefully you weren't bad mouthing.
No, the back behind the fences.
And I do walk that area, so I know what it looks like.
come up and they jump on the dogs.
There's no hearings,
Quit sending the deer down our way, would you?
There, they were eating kohlrabi this morning. I took pictures, got pictures of the deer.
There's tulips.
Oh, yeah. Like gardenias last year.
Really? They've got gardenias too. I
Well,
love
I put them out, and I got them blooming and everything, and then in the morning I go out. They were gone. I mean, gone.
Wild is wild in this thing. There shouldn't be too much opposition to it.
I do.
They don't.
I know, but it's like, I know some are bad, but some.
They're worried about.
That was my old some things we
Now, are those deer?
look like it.
I live by Campbell Park and we have deer all the time.
No, we have deer in our backyard.
That's the marina, that's the wetland. Don't worry about your deer.
I see them running down.
Looking at the cozy. Can I have a salad?
Well, they've had their say.
That would answer a lot of their questions.
You've gotta be done with the fence. It's the one that needs the fence.
We have a wood fence.
The second one, the one we were on, was about the fence. Oh, but now we've decided we're gonna discuss it. They're not getting jumped.
Oh, chairman's heading to the desk. You better get back.
Next one's gonna be quick, I guess.
Doing okay, man.
Oh, I don't know.
You got it. You get it down.
I hope so.
So, as soon as you get
Hope something will be
substantive,
quick.
substantive. Substantive. Yeah, it's okay. There like 100 more times, you'll get it.
Yeah. Well, that's all I do.
Where'd everybody go? I just get so confused on what these two are different.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
This one shouldn't take very long, do you think?
We overlap a lot. It's now 9:41. No, I would have had to. This is a quasi-judicial land hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for development agreement. Subject property identified as County Assessor's Map 705801 on map 4N1W-6DA. The applicant is KC Engineering Consulting and the owner is Rich Bailey Construction. Because a quasi-judicial proceeding require observance of certain procedural formalities, we will take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an ex parte contact, conflict of interest, or bias in this matter? Hearing none. Does any member of the... Oh, sorry. Okay. Does anybody from the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? Seeing none. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows. Required statements of the staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations and decisions. The following statements are required to be made at the commitments of the hearing pursuant to City Code ORS 197.7635. The following list is applicable substantive criteria for this decision. Oregon Revised Statutes 94.504 to 94.50528. St. Helens Municipal Chapter 17.40 pertaining to significant wetlands. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria as described or other criteria in the plans, such as the comprehensive plan, land use regulations such as found in the Development Code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions or approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or a failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes the appeal to LUBA, Land Use Appeals Board, on that issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Okay, staff.
Thank you. So once again, this year I'm saying we're doing something we haven't done in over a decade. Development agreement for wetland development. This is a separate decision. It's very much woven into the plan development overlay in the subdivision. But it is separate. This is a recommendation and it'll go to the city council, ultimately adopted by ordinance, and this will result in something that's actually recorded on the property. And the principal reason we get to do this is our code says that wetland protection zones may be made part of individual lots with a development agreement, provided additional protection zones or offsite mitigation over the minimum standard is provided for such flexibility. So since you have that protection zone split in half easement, half tract, we get to do this. And so this is the instrument that will ride with the land, has a bunch of stuff to make sure it's owned and maintained properly. It's going to have the protection management plan and stuff like that. And we kind of covered a lot of the details through discussions earlier. The main thing are the special conditions. So the conditions of the subdivision will apply. And there's a few on here. In addition to that, we talk about the restoration plan as needed, the protection area management plan. The final plat shall reference the development agreement. So in the final plat, sometimes you will reference other legal documents, and it's very appropriate in this case. And then our code says the approval authority, who is ultimately the council, but based on your recommendation, may impose such additional reasonable conditions to mitigate other identified impacts resulting from development on the site. And in the staff report, I say, does the commission recommend anything else? And the one thing that I started to think about after getting this done was the fence, which we've now talked about quite a bit.
Let's talk about the fence.
So in my memo dated today, I have at least my first crack at a recommended condition for. And just as a reminder, that would be to install a fence along the 50-foot upland protection zone of all lots that abut it, subject to city review and approval, meet city standards, be uniform, include a gate, and not obstruct the proposed trail. So you can agree with that, reject it, modify it, and
Is that the only condition, or does anyone else have anything else?
or anything else you may think of.
Okay.
No other conditions? I move we accept.
It's a public hearing.
Yeah,
Oh,
still in the public.
So,
We ready?
moving fast.
yeah, you are.
That's just a staff report, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Are we gonna have public?
Yes.
I have a question. Who prepared the agreement? Was that at the developer's preparation and then the city's reviewed it? Has the city reviewed it?
The developer provided one, which is a template based on another one.
So we have one. Is this the one?
But this is not that one.
Okay.
It had a lot of errors, and I did work on these before the recession, and I had a rough template made based on all those efforts in the past. And so I completely went through it and cleaned it up.
Okay.
And that's what you see here.
Okay. Has the city attorney?
Not yet.
Okay.
But he would review it then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what I wanted.
Okay, any other questions? Staff?
Did you include some of their elements of theirs in here?
Well, they
Specific
just
to the
used
project?
they just used another example from the city.
Oh. It's not specific to this project.
No, it's specific to the city's law, however.
With the sensitive area.
Yeah.
All right.
And so then they would have an attorney draft these documents that would go in conjunction with the plat, and then all of that would have to be approved by the city, correct?
Yeah, well, this is pretty much done. So we fill in some of the, the dates and numbers, add the attachments, then record it.
What are we doing?
Well, and I know it's weird, but technically there's a recommendation and an approval by the council. Development agreements are a land use decision. And we could go over all the details ad nauseum. But really the main thing are the special conditions related to the development agreement. And since it's about the wetlands and how we deal with that, and given the reference I said, additional reasonable conditions to mitigate identified impacts, that's to me where the fence comes into play, because of what I've seen throughout town, where the fence is a barrier, people don't care what happens on the other side, and that was my idea, is if we make sure a fence is in place before everything else, so it's in the right place, it's uniform, and with gates so you can get through. That's why I had that idea. You could say, you know what, let them build the fence how they want. I just my feeling is you could end up with a hodgepodge and an inconsistent approach, which is not, I think, what you want along that wetland. Or you could say that the fence just has to be incorporated into the protection area management plan. And let them figure it out, and if a wetlands biologist blesses it, you're okay. But personally, I think it should be explicit.
Okay, could we hear from the applicant?
Move it along.
You're on your own.
James Kessie, Kessie Engineering Consulting, 6400 Northeast Highway 99, Vancouver 98665. The question is with regards to the fence, and we've talked about it in the previous application and project. We could do it either way, I guess. If the concern is trying to make sure that the home, if the 50-foot buffer area is included and has common maintenance and care, the responsibility of the HOA to fund that and to do that, then I think then having a more restrictive fence is not as big of a deal. If the homeowner is supposed to maintain that area, then having the access like Jacob is proposing with a gate and allowing the homeowner to get access to that is probably better. What I've seen on some subdivisions like this where you have a transition is that instead of putting maybe a solid fence, is that you might put in a split rail fence, like a three bar split rail fence, and so you can it visually allows the transition, but it also defines the boundary of where the edge of the buffer is. And so that's one approach. It doesn't prohibit wildlife from movement through there. It also allows people to access it because ideally you want people we're going to have a trail through there, so people are going to be accessing the buffers, and you don't want to prohibit, I have seen jurisdictions where they prohibit the entry of people into wetland or wetland buffer, and that's probably not what we want to do because we want people to be stewards of it. So try to encourage good management of it and then also allow access. So maybe from a simplicity standpoint, if we just recommended to have the management of the buffer, the ultimate responsibility would be for the HOA, and that would be part of the documents, and then it would be subject to the recommendations of the wetland biologist with the final review by the city to make sure that it meets the intent and is feasible, and it will also allow access to there. That might be one way to approach it. I'm not sure there's a magic bullet here, but there's definitely different ways to do it. But I think that might be the most secure way to do it, because if you do put a fence right at the edge of the 50 feet, and let's say it was a 4-foot, it does create kind of a barrier there. So that's not a bad thing, but it just depends on what you want to encourage.
So what I would like to ask for is whatever fence is built is to be built of materials with lasting value.
Mm-hmm.
Wood is going to rot into the ground.
Right.
Or have a maintenance of it built in has to have a fence there.
Yeah, whatever fence goes in there would have to have a maintenance provision in it, and agreed to use higher quality materials or materials that have a longer lifespan. Typically, you can use if it is made out of timber lumber, it probably has a lifespan of 15 to 20 years if it's properly maintained, and then you got to replace it. So if you have a funding mechanism, then you can replace it. If you use materials like, I guess you can use metal or aluminum or brick or vinyl. Yeah, the brick becomes a little bit problematic because then you're from what I've seen on all the other developments is that they want to try to create more of a soft transition. So when you have hardscape like that, sometimes certain biologists say that it's, they want to try to encourage it so that it's more natural. So that's why a lot of them will try to use cedar, a natural material, but it does require funding and maintenance, and it requires that. So if we write that into the, I guess whatever fence gets in there, I think it would be a natural requirement that it would have to have permanent maintenance included as part of the HOA. I mean, we're gonna have the stormwater facility, the little diversion berms. That's going to be maintained by the HOA, and so to have a fence be a responsibility, I think that makes perfect sense, and I would agree with that and support that and make sure that we get that in there. So,
but James, it seems that if the fence was further back from the 50-foot edge, it may interfere with some of that water detention.
Yeah, because that's within their 25 feet in the lots.
yeah. So the other thing I have seen is and it really depends on the situation, is instead of using a hardscape fence, I've seen them at the edge of the wetland or maybe at the 25-foot mark here, is to put in a natural, like a thorny bush, like a hawthorn or something, but you have to maintain that too. So it's not easy. I don't think there's a one size fits all on it. Yeah, you have a good point on the. The stormwater facilities aren't going to be, they're not going to be big structures. They're just going to be, half a foot to 3/4 of a foot deep, and then there's a small berm. So a split rail fence probably wouldn't be impacted that much, and we can, maybe adjust the angle of the split rail fence in a couple locations. There'll just need to be a gap. I don't know if you could put back up the plan, please, Jenny, if you get a chance. Yeah, the subdivision. So, we'll have a couple gaps for where the trail enters and leaves. It's really not all that long of a fence. But, yeah, so right here, this will be a trail that comes down and then comes all the way through here. So there'll be, wherever the fence is here, there'll be a gap there that will allow access. And then the same thing, I guess, this fence would probably end like right over in here. So the good thing is that along Sykes Road is that you'll visually be able to see into the wetland, so it'll actually be nice and appealing. And then the neighbors are up. This does slope up, and these lots are several feet higher than the wetland, so there is good drainage. And then they'll also be a little bit higher up, and so they'll actually be able to look out. I think it'll be a really nice amenity as far as having some natural area there. So if we put a fence, so you could put a fence right here, or you could put a fence, somewhere, some natural point, or you could put it at, along this 25-foot zone here as well. I mean, we could talk to the wetland biologist about it, and also with the city staff, and come up with something. Again, tonight, I think you're just charged with making a recommendation if the design approval. We could also discuss it more with the city council, but I think you've actually heard probably all the facts, so it wouldn't hurt to have a recommendation on what you think is the best. I think you have a pretty good understanding of, and it seems like you all have personal experiences with wetlands and fences, so those are all good things to. not every board has that, or commission. So
yeah, the one thing I was concerned about that I've seen the city fail on big time is plantings. They have a 1-year guarantee, which is absolutely nothing for woody plants to make sure they live.
2 year.
2 years still.
But luckily, in this case, there's not a lot of proposed impact.
Yeah. But you talked about doing some plantings, starter plantings. It will be absolutely worthless if they're not maintained, watered, checked to see if they're dead, replanted. When the state has buffers and wetlands, they require at least 5 years for woody plants, because it takes about 4 years for them to get established and get going. After all 4 years, they'll get going. 1 year, 2 years, you don't know what they're going to do. You have no clue if they're going to live or not. So I think that's a real fall down on our maintenance. I mean, that's a typical construction kind of 1-year guarantee that the nursery plants are alive when they planted them. That's all it's saying, right? But
the DA I think actually has a 2-year. Is that right?
yeah.
Well, the 2 year is what's embodied in our chapter 1740, which is our wetland chapter.
Okay. Yeah, we could certainly, if that's a concern, we could lengthen it out a bit.
It's the only reason to do it. Otherwise, you're wasting your money on the plants.
Longer
It's
time.
it's a bottom line. If you want to spend the money on native plants, they're expensive. Don't just do 2 years of monitoring because it's going to be nothing. I mean, it could live, but they may not. And how do you know?
Right. Well, I think one of the things that is good about having the stormwater diversion is that will provide water, and help. It depends on when you plant them too, obviously,
Yeah.
your survival rate. And so the other thing that I've tried to do on projects and recommend is that they actually overplant. So,
Yeah.
if the wetland biologist recommends, 100 plants in a certain area, then we'll increase that by 15 or 20% or whatever. Because you go out there and plant it once, and then you have, the survival rate might be 70, 80%. So then you actually have closer to your goal.
And I trust Stacy and what she'll do. But, Stacy, right?
Stacy, yes, yeah.
I have to say though, I tell you a little quick story. I did a mitigation plan for when I was a consultant for the Grand Ronde tribe in a housing development, and put a trail through the buffer, which wasn't the way the Department of State Lands did it at the time, but it was in Indian land, so the state wasn't involved. And I put a trail and a bridge and so forth, and they love that thing. They just love that buffer. They keep it clean. They took all the bushes and made them topiaries, which is not exactly what I had in mind.
They
overlap. They take care of it to what they think they should take care of. I had another mitigation area in Happy Valley where they wanted to see the ducks, so they trimmed the trees way up high, so there were just posts with little bushes at the top, so they could look through, and that was maintaining it. Homeowners associations sometimes go in there and go, we don't like these native plants. They're kind of messy looking, and they'll plant other plants in there because they look cooler. So it's what looks good to the homeowner association and the landowner maintaining it, or they're mowing it down to the water so they can feed the otters, which are nutria, or whatever. I've seen a lot of those things. So maintaining these grasses look awful. There's a mitigation area in St. Helens here that the neighbor doesn't like it because it looks so messy. And I look at it and go, this looks nice. It's natural. And, he wants it more manicured, more cleaned up. And the other thing about maintenance is invasive species is that hopefully that's in there because they can make it really bad looking. And that's something you can go right into the wetland and clean out legally because they're, that's non-native. So it's a good thing to maintain those for sure. But anyway, off my soapbox.
I've got a question. On a typical lot, you've got a faint dotted line, and I assume that's the optimum building site area?
Correct. That's the edge, the proposed building envelopes we have.
Yeah, which not necessarily would be that, but that's where,
right.
as far as you could
That's
go.
the extent, yeah.
Okay.
Maximum extent.
So you've got a 50-foot buffer, and then if you were to put a fence there, I'm looking at this, you've got a 5 foot before the buffer. So you'd have a fence 5 foot behind these houses? That would...
You could potentially, but if you look at those lots, you can actually see, for example, lot number 8. If you look at lot number 8, there's actually a dimension. This dimension right here is the distance from the front of the front setback line to the rear setback line. That's actually 55 feet deep. So I would say a typical house is probably somewhere between 40 feet deep to 50 feet deep. Yeah, 40, 45 as an average, and then, and these are actually, we try to make these a little bit wider. So I don't think that, and this one's even deeper. This is closer to 70 feet. So these lots are probably not going to come back all the way. You're going to tuck your houses up as far as you can towards the front, and then you're going to probably have a little bit bigger space there. So you're right. They could go up to 5 feet, but it's going to require kind of fitting that to the
Okay.
to the lot.
To be unobtrusive.
All right. Any other questions?
Not a question, just an observation while you're thinking of what you're gonna do. Is it likely, it seems to me like it would be likely that that wild space would be a visual treat for the homeowners. So you need to have some kind of barrier, but they wanna see through it.
That's kind of my thought. Yeah, I don't think a 6 foot tall fence at the edge of the 50-foot line is probably. I mean, I guess you could see over the top of it, but it kind of creates a obstruction, like Jacob was saying. Then people feel disattached to it, and so there's it's trying to find the balance between something that provides some kind of a barrier, but also allows people to feel like that's that they take ownership of the habitat, right? So ideally, people are going to self-police. They're going to walk down the trail. They're going to say, "Oh, yeah, look at that." Or I see some English ivy. I'm going to pull it out. Or I see a Himalayan blackberry. I'm going to pull that out. And then if somebody dumps a wrapper or something, they're going to pick that up, right? Because that's part of the common space. But if it's right behind their house, I also see people taking pride and ownership of the space right behind it because they know that's part of their lot. And that's what's happened on some of the other projects. If you define it enough, but then it's also clear in the documents that they're going to get, the HOA and the CCR, it's going to be clear where their lot boundary is, and they'll know that that's part of their lot, but they'll also know that there's limits on what they can do with it. They can't go in there, they can't put sheds on it, they can't come in and plant a bunch of Leland cypress or some non-native species in there. It has to be something that is on this approved plant list or is a native species. And if they kind of stick with that, I think it'll be somewhat self-policing. But if someone did violate the terms, then you can always go back to the CCNRs and the management plan, and somebody can say, well, this doesn't meet it. And it's just like someone who doesn't follow the CCNRs and the other. If you make a complaint and then they say make a corrective action, so it's part of living in a neighborhood. So, but the main thing is you have the funding. If you don't have the funding to do the maintenance, then that's a problem. So if you address that up front and you have some fund to start it with, and like I said, if we properly set it up like we're planning on doing, I think that'll avoid a lot of the issues. I actually had set up an HOA 10 years ago, in 2005, so it's been 12 years, and it's now going very strong. It's got a wetland through the middle. It's a trail, very similar to this. It's got a trail that goes through it, connects to a park. There's 2 areas that are part of the lot area, and then that was planted by the HOA, or was actually by the development. They planted it initially, and it's been maintained, and they have bird boxes, and he's got a couple park benches, and it's nice. It's a nice area, so it does work, but you have to set the rules up, and you have to set it up and plan for it ahead of time. And so, but all your questions and suggestions are great. I just I think it'll be kind of neat, something different.
Do we have any say in the fences and where they are in this particular?
Well, let's deliberate. Let's move on.
Thing? I'm just asking. Is that part of this?
That could be a special condition. Yeah.
Okay.
Just
confused a little bit.
Because the way I see it, some families may have children, some may have dogs. Yeah. The lots can change ownership over time. And so the composition of the owners is kind of the wild card. And we know a lot of people like fences because of those reasons. And so my thought is if we can address that head first, that way there's something there and that helps prevent other problems.
Okay.
That's kind of my take at the suggested condition.
All right. Well, let's move ahead. Okay, is that it? Oh, we've got something coming up.
Split rail fence isn't going to stop that.
No, it isn't. I agree with you.
So here's a suggestion, you can just pass that around.
So are you submitting a smartphone to the record?
So if this stuff is not going to rot, I think that's
a metal, woven metal.
Yeah, but what are the uprights?
The uprights look like they're cedar. Oh, PVC. So you could use
ideal.
material. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think the neighbors would like that, and the families in the area would. You'd be gates in, right?
Yes, easy to put a gate in. Yep.
You know, keep the dogs from taking their bath in the.
Yeah, actually, that's actually not a bad thing because
I
it
like
does
that.
provide a little bit of privacy
That's
with
good.
animals, and so that's
Okay,
actually a nice.
let's move on. I've got to get a
Keep
few more
children
things
and
here.
dogs in, too.
Great, thank you for testimony.
Okay,
All
thank you.
right.
Home someday.
Do we have anybody in support of this application out there? We know you guys are. Any neutral? In opposition? Seeing none. And the rebuttal, don't have any. And does the commission have any final questions? Okay. Hearing no further questions, the commission, no further responses from the staff, the public record is closed. This matter is returned to the table for deliberations, oral discussion.
I kind of like the recommendation by the applicant that the expert be allowed to work with the city on the proper fencing and where it's going to go, rather than us trying to figure it out.
I agree.
Well, I think Jacob brought up a good point. You've got the property and it's sold to some people, and their needs change as children or dogs or whatever. They want to keep a fence, but we need to delineate that area.
Well, yeah, but
And you've got to, if you buy that property, you'd really like to have a backyard, would you? I mean, truly, that fence would be 5 feet if you build out to that where they could.
Yeah.
And that would just be, if you've got 25 feet you like to look at. So you could put in poles every 10 feet, so it would show where it is, but it's still open with a view and everything like that.
Mhm.
So I don't think it needs a solid fence, and then you'd have to still have the caveat where people would be allowed to make something solid there. That'd be up to that, so I don't know how we'd want to.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think
Well, they can do that. He just has to put in a fence. I can put whatever I want in front of it.
Why don't we just make it a minimum column every 10 feet or something that, if you need to delineate that.
So do we
Think
want
we need to do that?
Well, the way it's written now,
gates so that people can go through to the other side?
There wouldn't be any, there'd be total access.
How? If
Finding
you've got a 5-foot
no
fence?
fence.
No, no
Having
fence.
no fence.
No fence.
Oh, no fence.
Just some columns every so often, whatever they'd be, treated posts or whatever, that would show that. Because if you get that's 25 feet of backyard, you could have a nice view.
Yeah.
But I think there's two issues. You have to delineate where they're not allowed to do anything beyond that. And then you have to allow the person that wants a fence. So we can't,
Okay, but if you're mowing your lawn and the chute shoves the stuff over into the wetland, you can't do that.
you can toss it over the fence.
Yeah, that's what happens all the time.
Yeah, but they toss it the other way.
I personally think it needs to be demarcated before anybody buys any of the lots.
I do too.
And make it the minimum visual, but the maximum protection. Like that example, it keeps dogs out, but it keeps the views through. And there are a lot of people that don't want a yard, older folks, and maybe that 5 feet is no big deal to them. They won't buy that house if you want a bigger yard. Buy another one. And I personally think if you're going to call it a 50-foot buffer, it needs to be fenced at the outside of the 50-foot buffer. That's just my opinion. And then the whole 50-foot buffer would be open to all the public use, even if you own that little strip. It's too hard to make sure that every single one of these lots is maintaining that little 25-foot strip equally. And if it's all done, the whole 50-foot buffer is maintained well altogether. It's a lot easier for a maintenance crew, whatever, to go through and take care of it. If you're hired somebody, for instance, then go knock on the door. Can I get in your little strip back there? So that's my opinion.
And you could make the protection zone easement accessible to all as a condition of this. If you want to go that extra.
I just don't know how you'd keep them from accessing it. So you might as well, if you don't have a fence out there. Because Mr. Private Property in number 7, he doesn't want anybody walking his little strip out there. What's he going to do? He's going to yell at everybody that walks on his property. So just have to set it up that way to begin with, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
All right, do we have a motion to?
So that, if we wanted anything like that, we'd have to add in your special conditions that you don't have here already, right?
Yeah.
It'd have to be a number 5. It doesn't have to be a huge fence, just has to be demarcation, right?
Yeah, the way it reads now is before the city signs the final plat, which means it's in there before we cut the lot up, that a fence is installed along the 50-foot upland area. We don't really get into what it looks like other than it's uniform and has a gate for each lot.
Yeah.
And doesn't obstruct the trail.
They wouldn't care.
That's number 4 on your memo.
Yeah.
I think you worked it well, Dan.
Yeah, I think
Maximum
so.
protection, minimal visual impact. You could add that to the blanket statement so that there's some design criteria for the fence.
What I said?
Maximum what? And then we're gonna have it.
I don't know what I said now.
Maximum, you're protecting the wetland buffer, so
Yeah.
maximum wetland protection, or wetland buffer protection, but minimal visual impact.
Yeah.
Meaning low profile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you can repeat.
Stuck on this one, aren't I?
Gate
You
for
repeat
each
that.
parcel.
All right.
The gate for each. Do we need
I
a
make
gate
the
for
motion that we accept the special conditions that staff has written here and add a number 5, that a fence be built by the developer before the lots are sold. That is a maximum protection for the wetland buffer and a minimal visual impact, so that the people can enjoy the greenery without having a wall there. Well, it's not too much
on
words.
a gate on each
Oh,
lot?
with the gate so they can access it, so they feel like they own that, still own that. So
Second it.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Greg did.
Oh, okay. We have motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Passes.
man, I didn't know this could be the
This is a
primary.
recommendation.
person
This is
talking
a
today.
recommendation, yep.
All right.
I know it was wetlands, but I'd have to do all the talking.
Your expertise is
Well, once in a while, it's great to have somebody who knows what they're saying, and, you know, it actually connects to reality.
But he's not an engineer.
I'm not an engineer. I'm not a hydrologist.
Hey, we have the acceptance of agenda.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a recommendation, right?
no. She's talking about the next.
Oh.
What?
Acceptance of the agenda, planning administrator's site design review.
Yeah, I have a question about that, Jacob. I have a question about number 5. I don't remember receiving that. Can you refresh our memories briefly?
Yeah, this is for an adult entertainment marijuana dispensary right by a school.
April
Thank
Fool.
you.
This is you know that little coffee place behind the bowling alley by Safe?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's the drive-through, and then there's a separate building. It was originally built to roast the coffee, but it's
Right.
been through several owners. And there was a fish and chips place there for a little bit, but it hasn't been occupied for several years. And so someone wants to set up a little barbecue place there. So
I just didn't remember.
yeah, that's what it is.
So it's like a food cart. Food
Do
cart.
we know if it's
basically.
any good, if the barbecue is gonna be good?
Who the hell cares? It's not our responsibility.
I don't know.
Again, so moved. Yeah,
I'll second it.
Aye.
he's our
You
guy.
can second and we accept it.
Aye.
Yes.
I'm a vegetarian, I don't care.
Moving right along.
Okay, moving along. Planning director decisions.
The plants that eat.
Everything's all right.
Okay.
All right.
Any comment?
Move we adjourn.
Planning department activity reports, March 27th.
It's in the report unless you have questions about.
No.
No questions?
We're busy, busy, busy.
Anything
I have
for
a-
your information?
I have a question or issue that I noticed. I live in Tamarack, so I can easily go up to that housing development, Eagles Nest or whatever it is.
Oh, Elk
Eagle-
Ridge Estates?
Eagle, what?
Up Hanky Road?
Yeah, Elk Ridge Estates, yeah. And so, you remember when we talked about the little strip of houses that were going to be built where the landfill was and how short the lots had to be because of the landfill, and it's got this launchable curve, and we're going to build a sidewalk out there, which they never did. And so they built the first house along there, and that driveway is going to take out some oil pans, big time. It is so it's this steep, launchable curb, and then the driveway. It's horrible. They're going to put sticks or boards or something in front of that just to get a car in there. How did that happen?
I don't remember. Well, the reason the sidewalk's not built is that's going to be built as the houses are built along there.
But remember, the sidewalk's going to go out in the little green strip.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Okay, fair enough. I won't beat you up over that anymore. But what?
So I guess I don't remember an extreme driveway there.
Well, it's there now. The first house right in the corner. Just so up a ways, the curb seems to be shallower, and it works for a driveway. But down there, they made it so steep, it's like hitting a regular curb to get over. It seems like it needed a curb cut for that kind of thing. Why would they? Is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be not have a curb cut the way that's designed?
Yes, from what I remember, yeah.
Well, it doesn't work there.
Because it's kind of a rolled curb behind. It's a mini frontage road, really, with a rolled curb behind it.
This driver's going to look at it, see if you want to park your car in there. I wouldn't. Even with my Outback. It's anyway. That's it.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Yep, yep.